No, they
You
do.
ready
They
to
keep
go?
them when you got people
All right,
at
I'm gonna
home.
wait till
Put them
it's
in the vent.
7:30.
My son would go, they go look at her. Oh, they still there? Still there? They didn't want us. Really difficult time.
Good, yeah.
I'll never do that again.
So, just,
Bring them home.
I don't like cooking my own muffins.
yeah.
Try
Yeah.
not to go
They were
into the
closed on
thing. They
Thanksgiving.
squeal.
Yeah.
No, I did it once.
I bought an expert.
You're-
My neighbor. I hit him.
You got a number of options.
Did the sacrificial
Make a
situation.
fortune.
I could never do
Pros
it.
and cons.
Yeah, they're like, no, sound.
We're all vaccinated now, so.
You know what you've done when you're. You know.
Know what you've done?
Good evening. I'd now like to call to order the November 14th, 2022 meeting of the East Bend School District Board of School Directors. If you'll now join me and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our two EHS Student Government Association representatives, Ms. Maggie Mochalski and Ms. Maddie Hess.
Good evening. We're going to keep it short and sweet for you guys. I know you have a long agenda ahead of you today. Starting off with some sports announcements. Once again, our field hockey team is in the state semifinals. No real surprise there. Unfortunately, our football team did lose in district semifinals last Thursday after it was rescheduled due to the supposed hurricane that was going to come through. Both soccer and cross country, boys and girls teams, unfortunately did lose in district, but club winter track started up today. Swimming is now in preseason, and due to the football game that was rescheduled last week, SGA's Powder Puff team was supposed to be playing this coming Tuesday as of tomorrow, but that is also being rescheduled to the following Tuesday, November 22nd, due to rain. Chess Club is now in a tournament that is happening this week, which will be ending on Thursday, but as of this week, they are going to be starting to compete against another school in the area every single Tuesday, which is awesome. Our mock trial competition team is also now in session. The London, France, and Italy trip was just announced for the summer of 2024. We're very excited about that after the French trip that ran this past summer. And student government applications, us, for freshmen and juniors are now open, and they will be closing next Monday, the 22nd. Thanks so much.
Yeah, good evening. We would also like to congratulate the cast and crew of Emmaus's fall play, Almost Maine, for a successful 3-show run. The theater department will be holding auditions for the spring musical, Fiddler on the Roof, December 14th through the 16th, so good luck to all who audition. The Emmaus Winter Orchestra Concert is this Friday, November 18th at 7 p.m. in Emmaus's auditorium, and the Emmaus Winter Band Concert will be held December 2nd at 7 p.m. and will also be at Emmaus's auditorium. Habitat for Humanity is hosting a gingerbread decorating contest in school on December 2nd during Hornet Homeroom, and the Interact Club is currently collecting toothpaste for the Angel Network. Donations will be accepted until November 28th. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does the board have any questions or comments for our representatives? I will just make the comment that I did attend the one of the performances of Almost Maine and really enjoyed it. And so I always appreciate a good theater production by our department. As usual, we invite you to stay for the rest of the meeting, should you so choose. If not, you may leave, but if you'd like to stay, that's great too.
Thank you. I have a few tests tomorrow, so I have to get out of here, but
right.
have a nice evening.
All right, thank you. Good luck on those.
Luck.
All right, our next item on the agenda is request to address the board. I count 11 speakers. It's going to be crucial that we follow the 3-minute time limit. Before we begin, I do have a statement I'd like to read. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with public comment, speakers should feel free to express their opinion, comment, or question, and understand that this is not an interactive engagement with the board or with the administration. Please direct your comments to the chair, be respectful, not engage in profane rhetoric, and be mindful that others, including students, may be listening. I would request that you consider that protocol when making your comments. For the members of the audience, please also be respectful and refrain from speaking during the public comment period. With that, I will now announce each speaker and their topic. When you step up to the podium, again state your name, and you will have 3 minutes within which to speak. Again, please be conscious of the 3-minute time limit, and I'll endeavor to give you about 10, 15-second warning by giving you the signal. Okay, our first speaker tonight is Ms. Shanna Baumgartner, here to talk about reading instruction.
Good evening. I come here tonight as a former educator teaching, among other things, reading intervention at the secondary level, and as a mother to 3 East Penn students, 2 of which have IEPs. My 2 with IEPs also received early interventions, so they have been getting additional support since they were 2 or 3 years old. For full disclosure, I also have spent the last 15 years working for educational publishers on curriculum and professional development. I'm not here to promote any specific curriculum or development. Prior to 2020, my children were tested and said to be at certain reading levels. My middle child was tested as a level P reader. Later, she became a level H, then in 2020, a level D. Some of you may be aware levels are alphabetical, so this means she dropped levels each time she was tested. Her IEP, however, is for speech, not for reading. She was meeting one-to-one and in small groups for various speech and language goals. She had homework for class plus additional work for interventions. Last year, I decided to homeschool my 2 elementary children, who were in grade 1 and 3 at the time, just to reset their relationship with reading after the 2020 virtual year, which was tough on students, parents, and educators alike. When I started to homeschool, I discovered that neither knew how to read. Both showed signs of dyslexia and potentially other issues. 1 in 5 children are dyslexic, and 80 to 90% of those who have been identified as having learning needs have dyslexia. And I bring this up because there's a lot of discussion going on now in the world of education on reading instruction. For a long time, there was a balanced literacy approach, which used leveled readers and three queuing system. And research has not really supported this approach as effective for young readers. More than that, there's a concern that the 3 queuing system actually harms young readers. And I saw this when I was homeschooling. So my middle child in particular, the one who I had the most data on, was guessing words and memorizing words. So she had struggled to decode simple CV, VC words. So we started the very basics, short vowel sounds, long vowel sounds, and we were building her skills. But in the meantime, she's been experiencing struggle as a reader, and now lacks a lot of confidence. And I'm currently trying to address her IEP with her school. So I just wanted to address this board to encourage consideration for K-2 programs that really address the how of reading, to approach it in an explicit and systematic way, because this is what the research supports.
Okay.
I've learned that the teachers are starting to go to Orton-Gillingham trainings, that's a great approach. So I just encourage considering sending more teachers to those trainings and offering it as a K-2 approach rather than just as an intervention.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next requester is Ms. Barbara Tenteros to talk about Code of Conduct and East Penn Educational Equity Plan.
Hello. My name is Barbara Tanteris. You know me. I've been coming for 6 years. To quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in The Purpose of Education, he warned us, if we are not careful, our colleges will produce a group of closed-minded, unscientific, illogical propagandists. Well, if Dr. King was alive today, he would have to include our public schools. Already we have unscientific, illogical propaganda in our public schools and colleges. For instance, East Penn's Educational Equity Plan offers gender, defined as characteristics pertaining to masculinity and femininity, including a person's gender expression, which includes a person's internal sense or feelings of being 1, male or female, 2, combination of male and female, or neither male and female. Oh, we can't really depend on our feelings these days, or any time really, because our feelings change continuously. We need to hold fast to facts. Parents don't want their children being toward some social experiment. They want children to be able to read, write, be proficient in math, and have a carefree, happy childhood. Not all this chaos and disturbing gender confusion. Teachers in East Penn School District are mandated by administration to spend precious instructional time to embed these illogical, unscientific approaches approved by the East Penn School Board, most of the board, but not all, and recommended by the superintendent. Teachers' unions provide plans for teachers to use and trainings on how to get these illogical, unscientific teachings to the children. Many of our wonderful East Penn teachers find themselves captured by the peer pressure from administration or suffer consequences. We, from Restoring Excellence in East Penn Education, have been paying attention. Alarmed and angry parents and former employees have brought to our attention stories of these things that are going on. One incident was when all fourth graders were held in an assembly to educate them on homosexuality. Is this appropriate for fourth grade? Our new revised code of conduct includes bathroom rules that give the few professed transgender children right to privacy and also the use of the bathrooms and locker rooms of their gender identification at the exclusion of the privacy and rights of the majority of biological students who use these same bathrooms and locker rooms. Why is East Penn School District allowing this insanity? We are being forced to believe a lie.
10 seconds, Mr.
All this transgender propaganda is a frontal attack on the image of God, who created us male and female. We will reap a bitter harvest by seducing our children into this irreversible, confusing, expensive lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Lori Miller to talk about the GP track.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. My name is Lori Miller. I'm president of the East Penn Education Association. I'm speaking on behalf of the faculty at large this evening. My colleagues are concerned regarding the recent quick decision to remove the GP track from the social studies and English departments, a decision that was shared with these two departments 5 days before it was presented to you on October 24th. These important decisions cannot be rushed. All stakeholders need time to examine, research, and to make sure these decisions will help the students of the East Penn School District. The term stakeholders, as you know, needs to include department chairs, elective representatives from each department involved, district administrators, building administrators, teachers, parents, the professionals that will be living this change, and most importantly, the students that will now need to learn how to be successful in this new environment. I would have hoped that students would have had the chance to discuss this decision with administrators before the decision was proposed to the board, so that students that will be directly impacted would have had the chance to also speak and ask questions and share concerns with administration. The teachers of these courses need time to plan, receive professional development and learning on how to move forward with this change, and study research. Study maybe any other district that made this change and learn from their mistakes they have made or may have made. This is such an important decision, yet only 1/6 of those stakeholders mentioned were involved in this decision. I know the teachers of East Penn can make many decisions work in the best way possible if they have time to discuss and plan and research with all stakeholders. The teachers sincerely want what is best for their students. I know that. Not too long ago, I saw my science colleagues struggle with a similar quick decision made in 2015. And I do not want to see this happen again to my English and social studies colleagues. At times, I can tell you that teachers do not feel like their input or decisions matter or even taken seriously. The departments involved are happy to meet with this board. They're happy to engage with a question and answer session, if you so wish. I am asking you to put this decision on hold until the proper discussions, research, and teacher training is completed in order to best meet the needs of the students at all learning abilities at East Penn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Our next speaker tonight is Mr. John Gallagher on the proposed plan to drop GP designation at EHS.
Thank you for the opportunity to express our concerns. My name is John Gallagher. I'm a member of the Social Studies Department here at Emmaus High School, and I speak on behalf of my colleagues, myself, and of course, our students. Besides the concerns that Mrs. Miller expressed, which I think we could sum up in a nice, concise way, we would really like for our district leadership to stop doing things to us and our students and start doing things with us for our students' benefit. We have some concerns about the data that was shared with us as, reasons for this switch. For example, one of the demographically similar school districts cited was North Penn School District, which actually has, along with other districts that were cited, has separate classes for IEP students, which is what we used to have in the Social Studies Department until it was taken away in 2019. I could make the argument that these district scores might be better than ours because they still have that. So this data is suspect, to put mildly. North Penn also has a separate school for students who are, let me make sure I get this right, with discipline and attendance problems and mental health issues. And we're not sure if the data that was cited from North Penn includes that school. Data from Parkland was also used as a demographically similar school district. The data shared with us indicated that Parkland has 4 tracks for its students. And according to their program of studies readily available online, that is true, but only for 11th and 12th grade. 9th grade has 5 different tracks. 10th grade has 6. So this data is incomplete, and perhaps this change would be good for later on in the high school years, but not for 9th grade as we're discussing today. We have the disease of decreased test scores, and we're not sure that tracking is the cause of this disease. Is this going to cure this disease, or is it going to eliminate a symptom of the disease, but it will still be there? Are there other things that could be causing this decrease? Is it attendance? Is it the course recommendation process itself? Is it a whole host of other things? And one of our very real concerns is the lack of academic rigor that has been removed from the middle school. And I have spoken with several of my former middle school colleagues who used to teach at Iyer as well, and they agree vehemently with me on this, that students just are not held as accountable as they used to be when they come to us in the high school. As one of my colleagues put it,
Sorry,
let me
10
quote,
seconds.
right, let me quote here, right? Is this a seed planted in previous grades that is now failing to bloom at Emmaus High School? At the very least, this timeline needs to be extended so it can be studied. The data that was cited did not come from our school district. It did not come from our classroom rooms. It came from other places. Right? For the benefit of our students, we should be looking at this. Thank you very much. I appreciate your concern.
Our next speaker is Ms. Shannon Petrunek on removal of GP track EHS program extension.
Good evening. My name is Shannon Petrunek, and this is my 18th year of teaching all levels of high school English, GP, CP, and honors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. To speak concisely in representing my department, I will be reading a prepared statement. The growth and learning of all students is important to everyone in this room, but despite the shared goal of creating a more equitable learning environment, our concern is that the proposed change and timeline will not help our students. Central Admin had a meeting with English, Social Studies, and Special Ed, citing 3 areas of concern related to the current tracking model: disproportionate demographics in the gifted program, a lack of GP students in dual enrollment classes, and severe reading deficiencies identified in this year's universal screener. Allow me to address. The GP track is not related to the gifted program in that students are identified in elementary school. And while many believe the process to identify gifted potential should be redesigned to make academic advancement more accessible for everyone, we fail to see how eliminating the GP track will address this inequity. Another concern regarding equity was the lack of GP students in dual enrollment courses. The Social Studies Department indicated that there are indeed GP students in their dual enrollment classes. The English department, however, does not have dual enrollment classes. Finally, admin pointed to the number of students at EHS with severe reading deficiencies. Screening every high school student in the first 2 weeks of school gave us new insight, but again, GP provides a much-needed bridge of extra help, resources, and tools at a reasonable pace to get struggling students back on track academically. Moreover, there are many changes that can be made within our current program to improve it, but phasing out the GP track is not the solution. When teachers asked admin if students want this change, especially students concerned with equity, admin indicated that they had talked to members of a club about eliminating the GP track. But according to members of that group, admin had not talked with them on this topic or any students representing the student body. When teachers asked admin if they had observed any inclusion or GP classes to see how we are working to support our students, they indicated that they have not. How can we create a more equitable learning experience with a proposal that does not listen or truly hear the students impacted by these changes? The disproportionate demographic representation in the gifted program and GP classes, as well as students' reading deficiencies, are symptoms of a serious core problem in our district that must be dealt with, in coordination with teachers and students directly involved. The 10-page letter written to the board and signed by all 21 members of the English department offered ideas on how to start this process within our current program of studies, and we would love to discuss it more in depth. These ideas will continue to support all students in an equitable fashion. Phasing out the GP track will not solve our problems. Doing so will only make them worse. And on a personal note, I know because I've lived it. My last school did this, which is why I left. A downside of a large school like Emmaus is that kids can feel like they're just a number.
Sorry, 10 seconds.
This proposal reduces our students to a test score when they are so much more, at least to their teachers they are. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Aaron Gavin on Program of Studies.
My name is Aaron Gavin. I have taught high school English at Emmaus for 19 years, and I'm here to talk about the proposal to limit the GP track. This year, I teach 3 GP classes. I taught 4 last year, 4 the year before that, and 3 the year before that. We don't talk about it much anymore, but when I started working here, we were constantly being reminded that we are the district of choice. What exactly that meant was never fully articulated, but it roughly meant that students and parents chose to live here due to the education they would receive. It meant that teachers chose to teach here because they knew their expertise, dedication to rigor, and professional judgment would be supported by administration. It also meant that students could choose to shape their own experience of high school. I grew up in Vermont. In 7th grade, I changed schools. I was suddenly in the smallest school you can imagine. I found myself with no track options. I quickly fell behind in English. Several other students were in my situation. The school decided to create 2 classes, allowing for students that needed more support to have a class that met our needs. There's more nuance, but basically, from my school's equivalent of GP, I became an English teacher. This is what GP is right now for my students. It is an on-level class with modifications that students can choose if they would benefit from a slower pace, more support, and when appropriate, less complex text. There appears to be this false idea that students are forced into GP classes. That isn't the case. There are no requirements in the English department preventing students from choosing GP, CP, honors, or AP. Students and parents, not teachers or administrators, choose the class that's best for them. Eliminating the GP track is taking away a choice that students and parents could and should make for themselves. Students choose to take GP classes for so many reasons that I couldn't even begin to articulate them all. But let me give you a few I've heard from students in the past. Students choose a GP class because their passion is in another core class or an extracurricular pursuit, and the slower pace and more support of a GP class allows them to take risks in those courses. Students choose a GP class because they must work every moment they are not in school to support family members. A GP class can help accommodate that. Students choose a GP class because they struggled in the previous year and they want to get their feet back under them. Students choose a GP class because they need additional modifications to succeed and grow in an on-level class. Students choose a GP class because their mental health is so fragile, they need to put their focus on themselves instead of on whatever the heck Hamlet is whining about. Or they just don't care to spend their wild and precious life figuring that out. And you know what? Those are all great reasons to choose GP.
10 seconds.
Kids are smart these days. All of the reasons I've listed and all the ones I don't have time to list right now are wise choices they are making and their parents are making. Just like our friends at North Penn, we have a class that are on level with modifications to serve this important function for our students. We call the class GP. 21 English teachers believe eliminating the GP track without a concrete, fully developed plan that all stakeholders have developed and believe in will hurt real students. Let's not change our motto to the district of I'll make the choice for you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. Matthew Richards on GP-CP merger.
Oh, there's a laptop here. Perfect. Good evening. My name is Matthew Richards. I'm a member of the Emmaus Science Department, speaking on behalf of the Science Department in reference to the points of my colleagues who spoke tonight. I would like to share our experiences and address concern for the critical decision proposed to take place this evening. This is my 6th year in the Science Department. Throughout this time, we have never had a normal year. The term normal implies that the year would be usual, typical, or expected. And we have never had a usual or typical year, and I plainly acknowledge that normality in this case was disrupted by force majeure-esque circumstances, namely a pandemic, and beyond that, in less than 6 years, our departments and buildings have undergone substantial and unrelenting change that to many of my colleagues comes with incomprehensible haste. It is this haste that causes me, a representative of the Science Department, to come and speak to you tonight. Our experiences within the past several years serve as a crucial example of how haste has led to dire consequences for even the most well-intended decisions. In 2017, my first year, I was assigned to teach GSI. Upon meeting my colleagues, I was shocked to discover that GSI had an overwhelmingly negative perception within the community and district, being labeled as a waste of time and a joke. Through various accounts, I came to understand that this course was implemented with deep vision yet shallow support, most notably a lack of time to properly design and prepare for the intended curriculum. Throughout its first several years, its development was tumultuous and ultimately stressful for both teachers and students. Stakeholders did not have a clear vision of the course's intention, which is exacerbated by inconsistent communication, brewing frustration, and mistimed support. The effect this had on students manifested in reduced rigor and diminished quality of learning experiences. Since its first iteration, we are proud to say that the course has grown into a meaningful and challenging experience for our students, but the struggle from then to now was much longer and harder than it needed to be, which was a direct result of hasty decision-making and mistimed support. We say the support was mistimed because it was present during remediation, yet virtually absent and deeply needed in preparation. The decision tonight centers around the structural overhaul of 3 departments in this building, a much higher stakes decision than rolling out a class. We recognize that this decision has great merit on the grounds of increased accessibility and potentially increased equity for our students. However, we also recognize and emphasize that even the most well-intended decisions can be tarnished by an accelerated or incomplete process of consideration. We fear that the current process is both. Not only were the professionals responsible for the success of this decision not given a voice in the process, they were surprised by its proposal. It is equity that we fear will be adversely affected by a rushed decision based on uncertainty regarding the proposal in question. Uncertainty was the primary cause of what made the development of GSI so difficult. A clear, collaborative, and complete planning process is essential for the success of any major decision. and we hope that the example of GSI can serve as a cautionary tale for other district decisions, including the more impactful decisions such as this one. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr. Tim Kelly, Program of Studies, GP Tracking.
Who did you say? I'm sorry.
Tim Kelly.
Thank you for giving me this time. I'm here to talk about the GP and college placement tracking. I'm a parent of 6 kids in the district. I'm thankful for the teachers and school administrators in our buildings. I can also speak to the lack of rigor to kind of mirror some of the statements that I've seen in the classes my kids are taking and the poor math curriculums that are in the district. I'll be back to speak about that. I think our students in the middle tracking will suffer because of these new course changes. Teachers can't maintain a level of rigor in college prep courses with a wider range of ability in their class. It's not practical to think that a teacher can differentiate to the needs of all these students. The result is watered-down courses with limited, meaningful learning experiences. Combining students into an on-level classes will drive down the learning of the middle-level students. It'll slow the class down and at the same time create discipline issues. We do not have the board and administrators giving teachers enough support to handle these discipline issues. These will cause distractions within the classes almost immediately. If you're going to do this, my question is, how are you going to deal with these discipline issues? When kids aren't passing, are they going to be given more? They're going to be even more likely to cause disruptions? Are you going to keep them in the course? Are you going to hold them to the failure? How are you going to support the teachers? I'm sure the teachers spoke about this. I can see that support here today. I wonder if you actually gave them proper consideration. I wonder if this is purely about finances and saving money. I believe that making these changes is a mistake. That's all I have. Thank you.
Our next speaker, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading this. Cyan. Your last name?
Becky.
Thank you. Talking about GP classes.
Good evening, school board members. I've emailed all members of the board prior to this regarding my personal feelings on the issues at hand and the situation it would put my family in. I hope that they have all read the email, as it was necessary to understand what I'm about to say. I did not get responses from a majority of the school board. If they haven't, I hope that when they go home, they read it. For those that don't know me, my name is Cyan Kavaki. I'm a student athlete who has taken GP classes. I also have an autistic little brother who is a freshman at EHS. I have read and heard about the proposed slow start to the tracking proposition. I know it won't affect my brother, and I know that it won't affect me. However, I'm not in this for myself. That is not why I'm here, and that is not why I speak. That would be selfish and a disservice to the community. That being said, I believe starting freshmen without access to GP classes is going to hurt them long term. Starting at a new school, in a new environment, with harder classes, and a much different schedule, is that really the time to push students up to a class they aren't prepared for? I ask why you want to do this so quickly, if not just for the sake of your image and the equity you will not achieve. I am aware that the number of students of color is disproportionate throughout the different levels of our classes, but we live in a predominantly white area. There are only 2 families of color in my neighborhood. This is not me agreeing with you. It is quite the opposite. I ask, what is it that you do for students of color outside of the school? What does it do for them to be in a higher level class if nothing but their workload changes? Will you not take into consideration the socioeconomic backgrounds that factor into such statistics? The issue this school board cannot completely control? How can we help them before we hurt the entire student population by eliminating the GP track? Maybe start targeting them specifically with help instead of making a superficial change. Not everyone is college bound. Forcing students to take on an extra workload is unjust. When I go to college, the kid who took GP classes and went to LCTI is going to make a lot more money, a lot more quickly than I ever will with my education degree. Hypothetically, if this does not work, which I don't think it will, and we need to reinstate the GP track, what will be done for these kids who now have huge gaps in their education? What about student athletes who take GP classes, get pushed into CP classes and start to fail? They cannot play, and it will not be their fault, it will be yours. What about the students who need to work to support themselves and their family? Why would giving more homework benefit them? GP students aren't kids who don't want to challenge themselves, and GP classes aren't full of lazy kids. These classes are on level for students who need extra support. Some people need them, and if you take them away, you take away the opportunity for kids like my brother, who need GP classes to interact with the general population and receive real-world knowledge. Classes are his opportunity to leave his learning support classroom, and now that he won't have that, because CP will be too much of a jump. He's currently thriving in GP Social Studies, but has no option for general science or the opportunity to get real credit for that class. If special ed teachers will run learning labs, how will students be chosen for extra help? How will they fit into the block schedule? How will English and social studies be able to give kids what they need without the assistance of the co-teachers they currently work with? I keep hearing that we can't afford new teachers, but then we hire new administration positions. That does not make sense to me.
10 seconds.
My final question to you is, are you willing to hire the teachers, put in the work, and make an actual plan? Or are you going to let this potentially ruin 100 kids' education? Will you do something about it? Thank you.
The next speaker is Madison Shelton to talk about GP class removal.
Hi, I'm Madison Shelton. I'm NHS president, and I'm here to speak about GP classes. And I do apologize if I speak quickly. I do have a lot to say. When I was in 3rd grade at Welland Wayne Elementary School, I can still remember when they took away the opportunity for us primary school students to break out of our classrooms to go receive schooling in math based on our ability levels. I was so upset that my 8-year-old self decided to write a handwritten letter to the superintendent at the time, Dr. Schilder, explaining how this was going to ruin so much for me and my other classmates. It was going to take away time where me and my fellow students were able to get the attention that we needed in the subject, whether it be an added challenge or a slower pace. Never has this separation affected my learning, perception of self, or interactions with others negatively. It has only allowed me to help be placed in a learning environment that fit my needs and gave me what I needed to excel. So I stand here today, almost 10 years later, asking for the very same thing that I asked for in my letter sent nearly a decade ago. I asked for you to rethink the proposal to dissolve the GP track in English and Social Studies department and to keep them as viable options for students to select as a course. What struck me during the last meeting was that it was mentioned that this plan would be an extension of our district's equity agreement, which to me wasn't right. I understand that we as a school are striving to foster an environment of diversity in religion, race, sexuality, and gender. However, removing GP classes does not foster the true meaning of equity, and in fact is closer to a more monogamous equality instead. Equity for our students in terms of courses does not mean and should not mean putting them all into the same class. True equity would be keeping the GP track, allowing our students to choose and get an education that best accommodates their needs. Giving everyone the same and giving everyone what they need are two very different things, and by going forward with the plan to remove GP classes, you would be directly contradicting your equity plan, which you have worked so hard to create. Another thing that stood out to me was the lack of credible resources used in the October 24th presentation. Not once had we been shown how our stakeholders, East Penn students and families feel. We were only shown what other schools have that are not Emmaus. How many GP classes have Mrs. Whitman and Dr. Murphy sat in this year, or even last year for that matter? The data shown, I feel, last time did not reflect Emmaus High School and our students. I feel as well that announcing this plan only just last month gave everyone a very short window to even begin to comprehend the amount of change that they are about to make. The admin works very fast, but I will admit, I work faster. This here is a true representation of the student body and how they feel. This is 337 signatures to support the plan to not remove GP classes. I've personally spoken with and polled 77 students who 94% of said that they believe Emmaus High School must keep GP tracks. Some notable quotes from our students include one who said, "It was very difficult to have a lot of work when I have a job at home to support my family." Another said, "I feel like it's benefiting me because personally I have an IEP and for me I need to take things at a steady pace. I barely even have enough time to get everything that I wish to say out today, so I'd be more than happy to follow up with anyone if you have any questions. But allow me to finish by saying, stop trying to force us to fit your golden ratio. We're not just numbers and we're not to be used as an impressive statistics. We are humans and we deserve the right to choose. Thank you."
Our next speaker, Sam Kreiner on GP classes.
All right. Hi. I'm here to address the GP classes. I don't think that it should be taken away because it takes away the choice that the students have. Some of them don't have time to do the homework that a CP class would entail outside of school because they're either working or they're having to do chores or take care of their family. And I know personally when I'm in a class that's a little bit of a higher level and I'm struggling and I'm looking around at all these students who understand, it just makes me panic and feel really anxious. So if you're going to take these kids who are, at a steady pace and pull them up to a class that they're not ready for, they're going to struggle. And I think that it's really detrimental to their mental health. And, I think the district always says we have the best interests for the kids in mind, but I mean, is this really for the best interests or is it just to make the district look good? And the teachers are going to struggle because they're going to have to be taking the GP and CP kids in one class. They're going to have to focus on the GP kids a little bit more and forget about the CP kids. And it's going to be really tough for them to try to figure out a balance for both curriculums. And, I know a big majority of the people who are going to be voting on this, you guys aren't in the classroom and you don't know what it's like. And I think that you have to take the consideration of the teachers in mind too. So all in all, I ask that you listen to the teachers and that you listen to the students because we're the ones that are living it and who are going to be suffering from it. Thank you.
Okay, our last speaker, Sarah Taylor, systems change.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Taylor, and I'm a member of Restoring Excellence in East Penn Education. Kind of before I start my 3 minutes, I listened to Lori and John Gallagher and was quite surprised to hear that teachers did not have an input into this, because I listened to the video 5 or 6 times, and over again it was said that the teachers and all the stakeholders were involved. Okay. Back in 1970, I was a sophomore in high school and a member of the Youth Association of the Pennsylvania Association for, at the time it was called Retarded Children. We volunteered in doing what was considered normalized activities for those individuals, including movie nights. These were all kids that weren't allowed to be in school. Movie nights, we even held a prom for some of the kids. We had game nights, we went on picnics and outings. In 1971, our organization, not the youth group, but the adult organization, Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children, took to court the state of Pennsylvania because children with learning disabilities or intellectual abilities were not allowed in school, and they won that, and children were then allowed to enter into school. So I'm very familiar with the needs of special needs. I volunteered 14 years with the Youth Association for Retarded Children, both as a kid and also as the supervisor for that class, for that organization. I am concerned about the fact that this was made so hastily and not given time for whatever reason. I have pages and pages of notes. Obviously, I don't have enough time to go over them. But some of the things I'm concerned about or I'm interested in is the large document that was available to the board members. I believe should be available to the public if they choose. It also looks to me like with all the interventions that are going to have to take place, you have the MTSS Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 2, Tier 3, you have labs, you have Hornet homeroom, you have pullouts. Kids are going to be segregated some way or another, and it is not appropriate. And while they're taking all of these interventions, what classes and opportunities are they missing? There were some excellent ideas as to why the GP track is good. And one of them was that, so they could focus on other classes. This would eliminate that possibility. Let me go through some of my notes. There's
10 seconds.
If they're not able to succeed in what you now have, the GP classes, how are they possibly going to succeed in a CP class without there being a reduction in expectations? There's already been a reduction in what constitutes an A, what constitutes a B. It went down from, 93 to 90?
Time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you to all our speakers. Moving on in the agenda, the next item is the approval of minutes. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bowman? Aye. Mrs. Bowen?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you. Next item is the district update from Dr. Campbell.
Good evening, thank you, and thank you to all of our speakers this evening. I want to first start off by reminding the community that this Thursday, November 17th, at Emmaus High School, Ayer, as well as Lower Macungie Middle School, the district will be hosting its annual and well-received tradition of our Senior Citizen Thanksgiving Luncheon. So we're looking forward to welcoming back senior citizens across the district after a 2-year break from the event. I, just like Maddie, would like to congratulate, I try not to do duplicates, but I feel as if the cast and crew of Almost Maine certainly deserve the repeated recognition for an amazing performance. As always, Director Jill Keebler, I think I saw her in the audience this evening, and the cast and crew did not disappoint us and delivered another outstanding show, reminding us all of the strength of our performing artists at Emmaus High School. At the end of October, we were excited for the fact that our middle school students were able to begin taking tours of LCTI, seeing a variety of the labs, speaking with students, speaking with instructors there, and learning about the educational opportunities that are there for our middle school students as they make the transition to high school. I'd also like to recognize several Emmaus High School students who recently qualified for District Chorus. It's an impressive group of very talented students who are mentored by Ms. Wallace. Special congratulations to Anna Chavoya, Elizabeth Duerholtz, Ben Fletcher, Leah Holisak, Sophia Ism, Kira Kelly, Hannah Kern, Jacob Kleindienst, Haley Kavacki, TJ Sizlov, and Naomi Sharpless. I'd also like to recognize another group of Emmaus High School students who about 2 weeks ago competed at DeSales University in a competition sponsored by the Consortium for Computing Sciences in Colleges. Emmaus High School was one of only 2 high schools represented among 28 teams, the remaining 26 teams being college-level students. Final rankings were determined by the total number of challenges that were completed and then further broken down in terms of the amount of time taking to solve the challenges. The team from Emmaus High School included Angel Lopez, Jamie Kale, Brandon Powell, and that team finished in 8th place, and a second team of Quade Pidwala, Matt Coyle, and Dan Toby finished in 21st place. Again, both of those teams from Emmaus High School actually outscoring 6 college-level teams. So we're incredibly proud of our high school students. And one final reminder, as Maddie also commented, several of our fall sports teams are continuing with postseason playoffs. I would like to recognize Emmaus High School senior Haley Reinhard, who placed 20th in the PIAA cross-country state meet last weekend. We just learned tonight that Haley was also nominated for the Morning Call Athlete of the Week, and so I encourage all of our high school and community members to vote for Haley for the Athlete of the Week. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Any questions or comments for Dr. Campbell? Okay, our next agenda item is the Fall 22 Data Overview from the Office of Teaching and Learning. Dr. Campbell, would you like to introduce?
Yeah, I will do a quick introduction. Members of the Office of Teaching and Learning are here this evening to provide the board and the community with a summary of district-level data. So the purpose of our presentation is to review data from, you'll hear about state standardized assessment in terms of PSSA, Keystone exams. You'll also hear about growth data, which will be referred to as PVOS data. We're going to look at some local benchmarking data, highlight strengths, and probably most importantly, focus on areas of improvement and share with the board and community a description of action steps to address the areas of need. And so at this point, I invite Dr. Murphy to come up and kick off the presentation for us.
Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for providing us the space to share with you this evening. The purpose of this presentation is to review data from state standardized assessments and action steps we've derived from the state data as well as our local screening data in reading and math. As a particular consideration, we wanted to share that some of the state and demographically alike data points have not yet been released by PDE. This includes the PA Future Ready Index, which is actually a month behind its intended release date. So we'll reference some of those data points, but we don't necessarily have the solid data from the state yet. Okay, so we're going to start with this slide representing our ELA PSSA data from 3rd through 8th grade in our post-pandemic testing windows. So we see 2021 and 2022. The numbers represent the percentage of students scoring proficient or advanced on the associated assessment. So in each of those grade levels, the students take the ELA PSSA. As a positive, when we look at this data, overall, we see that our ELA scores do remain solidly above the state average. However, they are lower than our desired expectation for our learners. This visual provides the same data, but we layered in data from other demographically alike districts as well as the state data. When we view the demographically alike data, we pull content from the public sources like PVAS. And on those sites, the earliest reported grade is 5th grade. So in this graphic, you see 5th grade through 8th grade rather than 3rd through 8th grade, which is what you saw on the previous slide. A quick overview of this slide for context, the far left clusters represent the state data, and the faded bars represent the 2021 data, and the brightly colored bars represent the 2022 data. There's a lot of information to fit on this slide, so we tried to make it pop as much as we could. The next from the left is East Penn compared to the state data. In addition, then, all of the other demographically alike schools, as we mentioned, we don't have 2022 data for them, which is why you see only the faded 2021 data. When we look at the data in this way, it helps us find trends and help analyze patterns that we notice between the samples here. So one thing that stood out when we reviewed this data last year was that while we experienced a pretty significant, what we would consider a significant dip in 6th grade ELA, which would be that light red bar in the 2021 data set, we didn't necessarily see that same dip in our demographically alike peers, which led us to reaching out to those peers, talking to them about what their reading and writing instruction looked like. And we implemented some changes last year in our 6th grade instruction. In particular, we ensured that we had our core was aligned to state standards, ensured that that standards-based instruction was being provided across all levels, and then also layered in small group targeted reading instruction for all students. So we were really happy to see that coming out of the 2022 school year, you see that red line in the 2022 data has recovered nicely. Still some work to do there, but we were happy to see the growth after we threw resources and support in that area. Okay, so the next set of data that we look at is our PVAS data. PVAS, again, is, well, on the previous two slides, we looked at overall proficiency, so the number of students that scored proficient or advanced, the percentage of students that scored proficient and advanced. PVAS, however, provides information regarding student growth. So one of the major reports that we pull from PVAS is considered a value-added report. And I'm going to read the value-added definition directly from the PVAS site to provide some additional context. Value-added is a statistical analysis used to measure the academic growth of groups of students and the influence districts and schools have on their learners. So again, it's a growth measure. It's meant to show how much a group of students, and on these slides we're looking at students as overall groups of 4th grade, how much they grew and whether or not they hit predetermined growth targets. So let's take a minute just to orient ourselves to this particular graphic. On the top left-hand side, you see the key for reading the value-added ratings for the overall year. So this would be the first thing that you see in the chart below. Ultimately, the blue arrows facing up, that indicates that the growth measure or the growth standard was met by that group. Green indicates that it was just met. I'm sorry, I meant to say that blue was above the average growth. Green means that it was met, and yellow and red demonstrates that the growth standard was not met. On the right-hand side, the district diagnostic, again, very similar metrics there. Blue circle meaning that the growth standard was more than met. Green, it was met, and the yellow diamond indicates that the growth standard was not met. So in the chart below, we see that 4th and 5th grade, there is a decent amount of blue and green, which is a positive sign for growth. However, while we increased our overall proficiency from 21 to 22 in middle grades, especially 6th grade, our overall growth data does not show the same positive trend, meaning that group of students, when we looked at them as individuals, they did not meet their growth goals for the year. Ultimately, this indicates that there's a need in core Tier 1 instruction, which we will address when we get to the action steps in just a minute. Finally, we wanted to take a moment. This presentation was ultimately focused on our state data, but before we discussed our action steps, we didn't want to lose sight of our internal screening data. This slide shows results from our A reading assessment from our fall baseline. This being a more normal start to the school year, we felt this data point is actually going to be really relevant to us even moving forward. As a reminder, A reading is a computer-based tool that assesses general reading skills. So for the sake of brevity, though, we did choose to focus on just our 3 transitional years. So 3rd grade being that really important transition when students are moving from primary learners to intermediate learners. 6th grade being the obvious transition from 5th to 6th grade. And then 9th grade being the transition from the middle level to the high school. The way we would read this chart ultimately is looking at that solid black line that runs across the middle. A reading is most closely aligned to general reading ability, as I shared. So we could make some correlations, while there would be other assessments involved if we were really putting on our reading specialist hat. We can make correlations looking at these charts by saying the students that are below the line, so the pink shading below the line, those are students who are not reading at grade level. Students above the line would be students that we would say are reading at grade level, at or above grade level. In a more preferred distribution, we would see at least 80% of our learners above that solid black line. And so you see that we're approaching that in 6th grade. 3rd grade, obviously a major concern for us. That's our cohort of students who in kindergarten, they were in kindergarten in 2020 when we shut down school. So those are our group of learners who have never had a normal school year. A positive is that last year when that group of students was in 2nd grade, they grew more than 10 percentage points throughout the year. So thinking optimistically and hopefully that if we're able to impact in a similar trend, we would get that group of students very close to that 80% mark by the end of the school year. And we have a little bit more of that when we get to the action step slides. So while the data from the state focuses particularly on 3rd grade and up, we all know that our work with learners starts much earlier. So Dr. Gutman is going to talk us through the work that starts with our earliest learning teams.
So in order to support our students in English language arts, K to 8, we're going to focus there first. The Office of Teaching and Learning has provided teachers with professional development in the latest brain research tied to decoding and comprehension, which includes Scarborough's reading rope and the simple view of reading. OTL has also coordinated training for regular ed, special ed, and interventionists, and word-level interventions, including Orton Gillingham, as well as Sunday Systems 1 and 2. ESSER funding was utilized to purchase these interventions and training for teachers and support staff. Also, ESSER and Title I funds have been targeted for interventionist positions to provide small group instruction and intervention, and decodable books were purchased through grant funds to support word-level reading. Specifically, when we look at K-2, a phonological awareness resource was purchased to strengthen phoneme awareness for our K-2 students. Our K-1 teachers were trained last year, and grade 2 teachers are being trained this year. Further additional word-solving prompts in looking at the instruction in the internal structure of a word and instructional routines for high-frequency words and decodable books were added to the ELA resources to support this word-level decoding and encoding for students learning to read. In 23-24, we will look to continue to augment these resources around structured literacy to add additional explicit phonics resources, additional decodable text for teachers to utilize during small group instruction, and additional training of teachers in word-level interventions to continue to build the capacity amongst all staff members at each grade level. Dr. Murphy will walk us through the action steps for grades 3 through 8. Dr. Murphy?
Okay, so in addition to the science of reading training that Dr. Gutman just shared, our intermediate grades have also increased their focus on the analysis of text and the use of close reading strategies. We began this work last year with the integration of common assessments, which ensure that all students are receiving instruction and assessment aligned to the standards, and continued the work this year as we integrated additional opportunities for modeled reading. This work will continue through additional professional development on close reading and analysis strategies and the development of additional core materials. And now Mrs. Thatcher is going to get started is going to transition to our math data.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Good evening, everyone. So available on this slide, you'll see our Math PSSA data for students in grades 3 through 8 from our most recent test window in the spring. In most grade levels, you'll note that our students' overall proficiency increased and that we are well above the state average in most cases as well. Where we did see a slight decrease in the 7th grade proficiency data, you'll still note that the overall proficiency at East Penn compared to the state average continues to be above. While our state data shown here reinforces the trends noted in our screening data and reinforces the need for continued support and interventions for our students. On this slide, you'll see the data that was on the previous slide represented in a more visual way. So this slide shows our 2021 and 2022 Math PSSA data for students in grades 5 through 8, since 5th grade is our earliest reporting year in PVOS. And it compares to the 2021 and 2022 state averages, as well as the 2021 averages for our demographically alike districts. You'll note that the 2022 data has not been published yet and is not shown here. So similar to our ELA data where you're able to note trends, a trend that you might note here is that there's a trend of a universal decline when you look at 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th across multiple districts, and that is something that we're exploring. Our PVOS state growth for grades 4 through 8 is available on this slide. Overall, our 7th grade demonstrated that they exceeded the growth standard for 2022. You'll notice that 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th grade overall did not meet the growth standard for 2022. We continue to recognize these as areas of need. I'd like to draw your attention to the lowest, low, mid, and middle groups for grades 6 through 8. These are typically our students you would most likely find in a math standards course at the middle level, and you'll note there that in grades 7 and 8, you do see some of the groups who met or exceeded growth for 2022. In addition to our standardized tests, we also take our screening data into consideration when we're looking at the performance of our students. So what you're looking at here is the AMath screening data from the fall for students in 3rd, 6th, and 9th grade. You'll see that in grade 3, our overall proficiency is 75%. Grade 6, the overall proficiency is 74%, and in grade 9, we are looking at 69%. So although we still have work to do, it is closer to our goal of 80% or more of our students being on level. So our action steps for math are listed on this slide here. You'll see that in K-5, we've worked on standardizing the math instructional minutes in order to provide a focus on small group instruction, differentiation within the groups, in order to meet a variety of student needs. The standardized instructional minutes allow for the increased focus in this way. You'll also see that there was intentional setting of Tier 1 SMART goals to support reaching all learners, the addition of 2 math intervention teachers, which are ESSER funded at the 4th and 5th grade level, and those teachers are targeting students whose data have indicated that they have the greatest area of need in buildings where it's also indicated there is the greatest area of need. This is happening during core and during win time, also known as what I need time. There has also been the introduction of a K-8 math tier protocol, which we use to identify our learners in need of the greatest support and to provide them with systemic and consistent support. In addition to all of these steps, it's supported through increased professional development for both faculty and staff that's targeted toward facilitating and supporting small group instruction in math and differentiation. Finally, the introduction of research-based interventions for students identified as qualifying for Tier 3 and Tier 3 support and Tier 2 and Tier 3 support in math, have been introduced this year. Next, I'm going to share our science PSSA data. You'll see here the 2021 and 2022 4th and 8th grade science PSSA scores alongside the state averages. You'll see as well, similar to the trend we saw in our other data, our students are performing above the state average, although we did note a decline from 2021 to 2022. This slide shows our 2021 and 2022 science PSSA data for 8th grade in comparison to the 2021 and 2022 state average on the left. And then you'll see the 2021 averages for our demographically alike districts shown starting with District A through G on the right. Again, you'll note that the 2022 data has not yet been published and is not shown here. Here you'll see our PVOS state growth for students in grades 4 and 8. Overall, our 4th grade exceeded the 2022 growth standard, while our 8th grade did not meet the 2022 growth standard overall. I do want to draw your attention to our subgroup 1, the lowest quintile. They exceeded their growth in 8th grade. Our action steps for science are shown here on this slide. So in 4th and 5th grade, along with the standardization of instructional minutes, we've integrated science into a STEM block in those grades. Teachers have received targeted professional development for science integration with a focus on inquiry in the science classroom. In grade 6, this year we're piloting the use of gizmos for science inquiry. It's a simulation that allows for the support of inquiry in addition to the hands-on lab manipulatives that students access in the classroom. And in grades 6 through 8, we continue to focus professional development on inquiry-driven learning opportunities, which is a continued effort from prior years. Next, Mr. Mahalik is going to share Keystones.
Good evening. I would like to start by sending my sincere wishes that this were a lot simpler. Unfortunately, Future Ready has not updated yet, so when we go on Future Ready, you're going to see still last year's data. But I thought that this would be a good opportunity to look at our Keystone data in a way that our entire school community has access to using Future Ready. So when you do go on to Future Ready, this is the current view as of this afternoon, and you can see that the 3 different Keystone subject areas are all listed there. But there's a lot more to those numbers than what you might know. So if we start with English Language Arts, it shows that there's 23.1% of our students are proficient or advanced. But we also have to remember that this is by cohort view. So this particular cohort is the class of 2022. And when you look in the top left-hand corner of every individual box, it says school year 2021. Those are the juniors in that school year. So this particular group of students, hundreds of them were exempt from the Literature Keystone that year. So this number, that 23.1%, only shows the percentage of proficiency for the students that actually took the test, which really in this case for literature might be around 8, 10, It's not like a very, very low number. In the case of algebra, we see that the proficiency percentage is 65.6. This reflects those students who took algebra in middle school or in 9th grade, but not the students who took it in 10th grade. And this is all because of the pandemic and the exemption at the end of the 1920 year. So this also, I think it's a good opportunity right now to bring up the term non-numerical proficient, which is a really important term to make sure that everyone understands. Non-numerical proficient scores were given to students who passed the local course. So if you were in 10th grade and you took English 10, and you passed that course the year of the pandemic, you were given a non-numerical proficient score. So it's given for students that were in that pandemic year, they were in that Keystone triggering course. So sometimes when you look at Future Ready, we have huge pockets of kids that were given a non-numerical score. They're not factored into this percentage. Okay, so I'll just say that again because that's a really important detail. We have huge chunks of students that are not factored into the proficiency because they were given a non-numerical score. I already went over that particular example with math, so those would be students that took algebra in 10th grade, and in the case of biology, this is really interesting. We see 89.4% of those students that year were proficient or advanced on the biology Keystone. This reflects the students who took biology in 9th grade, which would be honors biology. Okay, so that's what you currently see right now. As we project what's going to appear in the next week or so, again, I apologize, I really wish that this were clean and simple, but this was all manual calculations using a lot of spreadsheets on Google Sheets. So I apologize if the numbers in a couple weeks are going to be different, but this is our best shot. So what you see here are 4 different representations, or 4 different ways that the state may decide to show and represent the Keystone data that reflects the class of 2023, which would be obviously this year's senior class. So we have up at the top row, the percent proficient or advanced of all test takers. So literally just all of the students who actually took the test, this was the percentage of the students that were proficient or advanced for anyone who actually sat and took the exam. The next row shows the percent proficient or advanced of test takers, including all of those who were given a non-numerical proficient score. The third row shows the percent proficient or advanced of test takers, including those who were given a non-numerical proficient score and no score. So those students who did not take the test. At some point, those students who do not take the test are going to start to count against us. So I just thought it would be worthwhile to be transparent about that. Each individual test, anywhere from 9 to 14% of our students did not take the test for a variety of reasons. And then the final row, the percent proficient or advanced of test takers and no score of the test takers without the non-numerical proficient score. So I know this is kind of confusing, but if I had to predict which one I think might appear on Future Ready, I think it might be the bottom row. So this would show the percentage of proficiency for students that actually took the test and those who did not take it. Okay, and I also recognize that what I'm showing you right now is like, yeah, it could be anywhere from 54 to 83%-ish, somewhere in there. I know it's a huge range, but we just don't know until Future Ready comes out with that. So down below, and it's pretty tough to read, but I do have, just to make sure that this is clear, who these percentages reflect. So just like I went over on that previous slide that it doesn't reflect all students, in the case of literature, this reflects all of the students. This is the cleanest one that we have because these students were sophomores in the 2020-2021 school year. They all sat for the literature exam at the end of the year. In the case of algebra, these percentages reflect the students, or reflect the students who took algebra in middle school or in 10th grade, but not the hundreds of students that probably took it in 9th grade. And in the case of biology, this reflects the students who took biology in 10th grade in this cohort. So this does not include anyone who took 9th grade honors bio. So it makes it very difficult when you try to compare these two slides, because not only were we comparing different cohorts, but we're also comparing different, I guess, clusters of kids within each cohort. And just for what it's worth, down at the bottom, I do have, in the case of biology, we had 221 non-numerical proficient and 338 in the case of algebra. So then looking at the PVOS, the growth data, this does not reflect the cohort view anymore. This shows the growth data based on how we did last year. So just a reminder on the bottom left, it did include the grade levels. It's a reminder that when we look at algebra, we're not just looking at the high school, we're now looking at grades 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, wherever, whenever the kids took the exam. And in the case of biology, that's just a reminder that we have students taking biology mainly in 9th and 10th grade. So you can see here on this table, the subject areas in which we did make moderate growth, or the areas in which we exceeded the growth standard, and the areas that we did not. You can also see then broken down by achievement groups, what groups of students maybe grew more than others. And I would like to call your attention to the lowest achievement group in the case of algebra. So students who are in that group taking algebra most likely in our algebra lab at the high school. So this is something that's really good to see, because it looks like even if those students didn't show proficiency, this is really encouraging that we made growth, and hopefully we can attribute some of that to the algebra lab. And then to wrap this up with some action steps that we're taking at the high school level, just at the top, just some general continuous goals that it's kind of tough to pinpoint, just things we're always trying to do, improve how we respond to students who are at risk through interventions and the time that we have available, and then understand the available data and the best ways that we can respond to that as educators. I broke up the action steps in 3 different chunks so that you can see what we've been doing, what we're doing right now, and some things that we're looking ahead to do. So things that we've been doing, we've had the seminar course, and we've had the algebra lab, and then new action steps starting this year. Starting this year, we're now screening all students at the high school level in reading and mathematics in addition to the other levels. We're now screening and providing more supports for all of our VESPA students, because they also factor into the percentages that I just went through. Some of our departments set goals and implemented instructional follow-up. I've already presented all the math curriculum work that we're taking on. That's going to be a multi-year process for revising some of those courses at the secondary level. We're going to be starting a pilot program to look for different programs similar to an iReady at the K-8 level that might be able to close some gaps and give some assistance to teachers that are looking to close some of those gaps at the high school level specifically. We're also looking at the intervention time during Hornet Homeroom for our special ed students, and we have a study skills lab for special ed students, and then we're also going to be focusing on common assessments in addition to our midterms and finals, just getting on the same page instructionally. And then on the far right, some things that we're looking to do in starting next year, targeted professional development for our English and social studies departments, the ELA lab that you've heard about with the program of studies, and then also expand the algebra lab to include a lab opportunity for the students in fundamentals of algebra, which would be the course before they would take Algebra 1 for those students that do need that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gutman.
To finish off, really what we're doing here is the district is working in tandem at the systems level and the building level on specific action steps that align with our comprehensive plan. When you look here at the building level, there have been literacy and grade level goals that are created by each school team and analyzed after each benchmarking window. And it's either updated or revised based on the student data. That will be happening. We just made our goals these past 2 weeks, and then we'll be revisiting in January after the next benchmarking window. Further grade level data meetings occur to identify students in need of Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And in addition, there are child study and core team meetings that occur to monitor school-wide goals, processes, as well as to monitor the progress of individual students. And at the systems level, our administrative team is conducting walkthroughs and classroom visits, and the purpose of those is to gather data on instructional practices and classroom environment in order to evaluate the needs of our teachers and students for future professional development. And lastly, a cohort of K-12 administrators and teachers are attending a systems benchmarking sessions. These sessions work on systems benchmarking, which is a statewide process for system-wide change. After that group meets, there's going to be a formation of a K-12 achievement team for both math and ELA, which will occur when they're finished. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the detailed presentation. And I'd like to open up to questions from the board. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, thank you for putting together this report. I think is something that we've been looking for quite some time. And I know that the data was kind of slow rolling out and is not even completely rolled out yet, just because of the way that Harrisburg tends to share data with us, and everyone for that matter. But one of the, and I appreciate that some of my questions that I passed on to you were addressed in the presentation. I do want to highlight though slide 18, which was the keystone slide, the overall. I know you talked about this a little bit, but if I look at the data presentation overall, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. There's some things to celebrate. There are some things that we certainly can work on. and areas for growth. But I think that if I think about the one thing that jumped out to me when I looked through the presentation, it was that first box. And Mr. Mahalik, I know you talked about some of the challenges in interpreting that particular piece of data that we see there for the ELA Keystone. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the difference, and you talked about the cohort and the challenges and all that, but it's the same cohort with the same challenges that we saw statewide. And I'm wondering if you could share, or the team could share, your initial reactions when you saw the difference between our percent proficient or advanced and the statewide average, and especially when taking into consideration that in so many other areas we are far above and beyond the statewide average in other areas. So that was the one thing that I jumped out to me. I was hoping that somebody could share their thoughts on.
Yep. So I can't do it right now, but if you do click on, if you click on the little I next to statewide average, it does link you to PD, and then you can, it takes you to an Excel sheet that you can download, and you can look at the raw data for this particular group. When I looked at it last, I really think it was single digits, the amount of students that were actually feeding into this percentage. So I can't stress that enough. If we have 675 kids that are in a sophomore class, this percentage might really reflect 10 students. The others aren't factored into that. So that's why I think it is helpful, even though I just said 5 minutes ago it's tough to compare cohorts. This seems a little bit more normal to me, especially when we look at all of the students that are represented here in class of 2023. We're not talking about any non-numerical proficiency scores in literature. So I can only speak for myself from a data standpoint. I saw this and I was pretty surprised at the representation of this from the state of Pennsylvania. It doesn't come out obvious that this really might only reflect 8, 9, 10 students, and that was pretty disappointing. That you have to dig really, you really have to dig to find that out. But I just want to highlight that part again, not from someone, not from an English perspective. If you want to.
I would just add that, I think similar to you, I think when we all saw this initially, it was shocking. Certainly not what we all worked really hard to see, which is why we went on such perhaps a goose chase, I don't know, trying to track down all of these data points to be able to give you all a clearer picture of where this number came from. I can share that when we looked at demographically alike schools, many of them had similar numbers, also significant dips, also dips that looked below the statewide average. So in some aspect that gives us context. I think that my more specific reaction will come when we get the statewide average for the cohort that we now have data for, and then looking at 2 years worth of data will give us a better picture on what and how to respond to that particular data point.
Will we be able to have an update shared with us when that updated data finally does make its way in, the pieces that are missing? I think that would paint a more clear picture for us as well and help us to kind of track those cohorts.
Sure, we can make that happen, absolutely.
Thank you.
Because Mr. Mahalik already volunteered.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Bowman.
Yeah, I have a number of questions that are all about me just trying to understand how the numbers are calculated. And I apologize, some of them are in the weeds, but I think it's really important to, if we're going to be making decisions based on these numbers, at least I kind of need to understand how the different tests relate to each other specifically. And I was going to ask this one a little later because I could just go through the slide deck, but since Mr. Smith started on this slide, I'll start that one first. When you have students who don't take the Keystone, who opt out of it, do they get counted as a 0 then when in our scores? Like how does that bring the overall score of the Keystone down?
Yeah, they're not given a non-numerical proficient. They're counted as a no score right now. So the tough thing is I don't know how they're going to choose to present this data when it does come out. I don't know if they'll factor in the no scores, which would be, it could be a student that just didn't show up. It could be someone that opted out. I don't know if they're going to include that in the percentage or not. And that's part of the reason why I made this so complicated down in a row, just in case they do choose to include the no scores, but maybe they don't.
Okay, but when they do include a no score, is that, when you had that, it basically lowers it by about 10%. Why is it lowering it since they didn't take the test at all?
Because they're treating those students as if they exist, but we don't have a score for them. So I can just give you a really simple example. If we had a class of 100 students and 50 of them decided to take the test and 50 didn't, and of those 50, let's just say 45 of them are advanced or proficient, it's like, well, what's the percentage? You can say it could be 90%, but the state might say, nope, those other 50 count, you got 45%.
I gotcha, okay.
Sorry, I was just saying they changed the denominator.
Okay, I gotcha. So that makes sense now to me. Not how I would have done the calculation, so now I understand. Okay, just starting at the beginning, you said for the PSSA slide, this slide 3, that these are not up to, they're above the state average, but not up to our expectations. What is our expectation?
I think that's similar to like what you see as a typical breakdown. Like even when you look at the MTSS triangle that we've been showing you often, that 80% mark is considered an ideal mark. So the idea that 80% of your population at least would be at grade level, and then identifying the 10 and then 15% of students that or 15 and 5% of students that will receive some kind of additional tiered support. But 80% is like the magic number.
All right, and then these interventions that you talked about are all designed to nudge us closer to that 80% mark.
Yeah, and just to clarify some, and if we want to really get in the weeds, I'm going to let Dr. Gutman take the mic, but some of them are interventions, but many of them are actually core curriculum materials, meaning they're being used for all students. So Hegarty, the program that she mentioned, is a program that is meant to target word level reading needs for students in the primary grades, similar with the decodable books. Again, that is meant to ensure that students can actually decode words rather than memorize sight words or just rely on guessing.
Okay, that question's further down on my list of questions, but I'll stay with it since you brought it up.
Okay.
Could you tell me how that is similar or different from the speaker that we had earlier tonight asking for changes in how we teach reading?
Absolutely. So what we're looking at is looking at the latest research in reading and looking at using the decodal books to ensure that students are not guessing at words, that they are looking at the internal structure. So really adding the resource of decodable text to our list of resources is going to help us with that for our K-1-2 population. Oftentimes when we have some literature, students can look up and look at the picture and then kind of guess if the word is correct or not, as opposed to really explicitly utilizing their phonics skills to be able to decode the word. So that's the infusion of the decodable texts.
Thank you for that.
Can I add? I was going to just add one more piece to that, because the other thing that Dr. Gutman and I have been following is there's also state legislation, state policy that is coming soon, coming down the pike that we have been watching that is going to require science of reading instruction to be integrated into our school system. So some of this work we have been tracking for years now. So while it seems like it's a direct response to this, it's backed by research that the state is proposing. So this is us also trying to get ahead of the state policy that's moving forward.
That's helpful to know.
Yeah.
So when we get to the demographically alike slides, the first one I think is slide 4. Can you tell me how you picked the demographically alike comparisons? Like what goes into that comparison?
Sure. So we look for the major demographics. So district size, their percent of free and reduced lunch, their percent of free and reduced lunch, percent of Ls, the L population, so English language learners, and percent of students who are identified with IEPs.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then, sorry, okay, so PVAS, what data, where is that coming from? Where's that data coming from? Is that like a calculation based on PSSA scores, or is it a completely different test?
Yes, they are using students' PSSA scores.
And then these lowest to highest learners, achievement groups that are mentioned in there, what are those based on?
So you're talking about the 5 quintiles that we have here? Okay. So essentially what they do is they look at students' historic scores and they break them into 5 quintiles based on those scores. So there's the lowest population, then the mid-low, the middle, mid-high, and highest. And that's the state's language that they provide to those quintiles. And then they track those quintiles and how those quintiles perform.
Do you expect then that it might be okay that we have the little yellow, is it yellow? I'm not sure. Diamond in the highest, like those kids might be 98, 99th percentile, like they're out of room to grow on the test, or is that not a thing?
Well, that's a loaded question. So I would say that what the state will tell you, and Dr. Gutman was repeating to us as we were preparing today, is that they really want to see the lowest 2 quintiles. Those should be blue. Like you want your lowest quintiles to be blue because those are the kids that need to make the most growth because they're already performing below. Your highest quintiles, it is a metric that they're using. It's not just like you got a 99 and so you know the chances of you getting 100 is smaller. So there is a metric that's being applied here. So there is still the possibility for growth. But your point is not completely lost that possibility does diminish the farther up in the quintiles that you get.
And so our focus is on these lower ones trying to turn those blue. I guess that ultimately was my question.
Yeah, I think that our focus is on those lower ones and wanting to turn those blue, but I'll be honest, we really want to see at least green across the board in all quintiles because even our highest learners deserve the opportunity to grow.
Also on this slide, you're showing the upside down red triangle in grade 6 and 8th. What's your thoughts of what's happening there? Is it the jump from elementary to middle that's causing a problem, or?
Yeah. This is the math. Are you asking Ms. Bowman for math or ELA? This is the math slide, so I just want to clarify.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on a different slide than you.
Okay, we can move to that one.
I'm on the ELA slide number 5.
There you go.
There's really just a lot that goes into it. I have some gut instinct and then some things that, again, like I explained on the demographically alike side, we did some digging here, right? So it was really upsetting for us to see that our 6th grade was that low. So we did some digging, changed some practices, and ultimately saw that their overall proficiency went up. But you have to remember that while the 6th grade proficiency went up, that cohort left, right? So the cohort that was the original score is now in 7th grade. So some of it is actually just the change in the 5th to 6th grade test. So for those of you that may not be overly familiar with the PSSA, the test structure in and of itself changes significantly from 3rd to 4th grade. So in 3rd grade, the entire test is in one packet. It's shorter. In 4th and up, the students now have to take the test in 2 different books. So the questions are on one side, and then they bubble their answers on the other side. So the management of that is a whole other piece of test taking. And then in 6th grade, the intensity of the test, I guess I will say, amps up. And the weight what the open-ended question, which is called a text-dependent analysis, the weight that carries is increased in 6th grade. And then upwards through 7th and 8th grade. So the test itself changes, which alone could be a reason that the growth of the individual students might have looked good in 5th grade, and then once they got to 6th grade, they didn't grow as much because that test was just harder.
Okay, that answers that question. Sorry. I might let somebody else ask a few questions so I can remember what some of mine are. You can come back to me later.
Okay, we'll take a break on Ms. Bowman. Dr. Whitney?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Ms. Bowman actually covered a lot of my questions, but there are a couple others. Looking at the demographic comparison slide for math, you addressed, or I heard you address the drop on the ELA side. I heard you address the drop from 5th to 6th grade and come up with strategies and PD to try and improve that, and clearly it had improved from 21 to 22, but I don't see the same improvement in on the math side. And obviously all of our peers, or, well, not all of them, but most of them have the same dip from 5th to 6th grade. But can you just talk about what we're doing to try and address that, or to understand
Sure.
the causes behind it?
Yes, so this is something that we've seen historically in our district, and so we continue to examine the root causes for that dip, and something that we've begun the work of convening a team to examine the use of Ready Classroom Mathematics as our curricular resource at the middle level, and part of that includes exploring additional options that might exist to replace that at the middle level. Perhaps that it's time to consider that switch.
Okay. Is this something you anticipate being implemented in the next year or in the short term? What is the timeline for
Yes,
that? Okay.
yes, within the next year.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just one other question right now. On the overall screening, that we're going to be screening all students now in high school. I think I heard you say reading, mathematics. Can you help me understand the delta between where we've been with that and where we are going to 100% screening? How many students have we screened in the past?
Yeah, last year we only screened some students in English and mathematics. In the case of math, it was only some students that I believe were in like algebra lab or below, and now this year we expanded to do that for everyone, but English did something about the same. So historically, we've been doing it at the other levels, but this is a new thing for the high school.
Okay, and you anticipate this will enrich the data?
It'll enrich the data. It also allows us to get a better feel for where all of our students are at. It identifies who's at risk. There are students in the case of math that they might be in a geometry CP class, but there's still some risk there. And we've never really, like, you kind of knew that something maybe was going on, but now this allows us to pinpoint it and really dial in to see what our students need.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions. Dr. Whitney. Mr. Champagne?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Can you help me understand, like, if I look at the math PSSA scores, the trend both on our side and the state average just plummets. What is driving that dynamic? I mean, we're not standing out like we're doing great things, nor is on a statewide average is the state doing great things. Is it the test? What is the reason it plummets so greatly from 3rd grade to 8th grade?
Sure, so there are a few things we can note here. So first, similar to what Dr. Murphy had explained with the change in the structure of the test once you make that switch from elementary to middle school, that could be something that you see similarly in math. We are really careful not to make generalizations at this time based on just the 2021 data without the FRI having been released or without having like a 2 or 3 year data average to look at when we're looking at why we're seeing that dip across our demographically like peers or across the state. So if we're thinking just in East Penn why we're seeing that, I can speak more to that. And so if I think systemically about math in East Penn, and I think about some of the changes we've put into place this year at some of our primary and intermediate grades at the elementary level. So they now have standardized minutes. So some buildings had less, some buildings had more. Now there's equity in the number of minutes you have. Sometimes you saw an overabundance of whole groups, sometimes you saw an overabundance of other types of instructional modes. So now there's clear directives about how those minutes should be used in order to meet the needs that we're seeing based on our students' data. So a lot of the needs that we're seeing, especially at the elementary level are in numbers and operations. And so if we're looking at our students needing support in number sense, that can act as a barrier to accessing some of those higher level skills. And as you progress through the grades, you stand the chance to get further and further behind if those needs are not addressed as soon as possible. So when we think of math at East Penn, we're thinking of math as the system K-12. And so starting in K-5 and putting some concrete things into place like the math tier protocol, standardizing the minutes, we hope to see the trickle-up effect that our students will be coming to the middle level with stronger skills in math, where we won't be seeing perhaps such a decline. And then coupled with Dr. Whitney's question about what are we doing at the middle level, examining the use of Ready Classroom, whether or not it's an appropriate resource to meet the needs of our students, specifically in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Something else that we have been doing and continue to do, we have our math standards courses in the middle level, and so that is something else that we have implemented and that we hope to see a reverse of that decline.
But how do I relate this data, which says that if you go to grade 8, 75% roughly of our students are not proficient in math, and then I look at the screening data, and you're showing screening data that says 75%, 70% are proficient or on level. So which is it? Are they on level or are they not on level? And what is the difference between the screening assessment, PSSA, that why we think that, and why do we think the screening assessment is more relevant than maybe the PSSA? Because they don't make sense to me.
Sure. So the screening data is A-math, and that's measuring our students' broad math skills. So like their broad skills in basic math. And so the A-math screener is Common Core aligned, whereas the PSSA is PA core aligned. So that could perhaps attribute some of the difference you see there. However, our curricular resources are mapped back to the PA core, and when we do those standards, when we look to see the crosswalk between how they're addressing our standards, we do see that alignment. However, when we think of our screening data, we're revisiting that multiple times per year, whereas our PSSA, it's at one static point throughout the year. And so something you learn in September is maybe not necessarily as accessible as something you're learning in March if you're taking the PSSA. And so if we look at the anchors and the way that our district performs on the specific anchors in math, we do tend to see some correlation between the anchors that were most recently taught in the pacing guide are usually our stronger anchors. And then there is the fact that we have not always accessed all of the content before the test is given. So those typically tend to be our weaker anchors. And so the A-math screener, it does adapt. So that could be another consideration as well when you're looking at the differences for why you're seeing proficiency demonstrated in one way on the screener as compared to another way on the state assessment.
I think I might also add, just for context, that while the PSSA is designed locally in Pennsylvania, our screening data and FAST in particular is designed on a national level, and it's nationally normed and designed by national researchers. So in these data sets, we're comparing our students to students across the nation versus comparing our students just to students who took the PSSA, which again is a PSSA written assessment versus an assessment that's written by researchers. So I think that's worth sharing for context.
Okay, but I'm still not sure what it means, because I don't know. You put it out there, but what are you really telling me?
Well, I think the other piece too is that the picture is never based on one data point.
I agree with
So the reason we wanted to share multiple data points is because, if not that we would consider ourselves researchers necessarily, but we want to triangulate our data. So we want to make sure that we have at least 3 points to look at before we make decisions. So I certainly wouldn't want to look just at a Keystone a Keystone score. I'd want to be able to look at the Keystone score and the screening score, and then possibly midterms and final exams. I want to be able to look at more than one piece of evidence to make a decision. So while these are not necessarily holistically making a very clear answer of like how our kids are doing in math, when we look at each individual student's data point, it does help us create a picture for that student and what their educational plan should look like.
And how frequently are we doing the screening?
We screen 3 times a year.
It would be interesting to see how that changes over the course of the year so that we can determine whether it's actually working or not, or if we're making progress.
Exactly.
So what about, you said that we have not screened at the high school level yet, so that's why that data is not there, or what, where?
We have, this year we screened everyone. So
So where's the comparable data?
if you see, the only ones that are part of this presentation are just grade 9. And I'm not sure if I included this when I did the math presentation a month ago, but you can see here on the far right, this is our proficiency for grade 9 students on A math. And if you would like the screening data for grades 9 through 12, we can certainly provide that.
Well, what is it telling you about where our students are?
It's very similar in terms of the percentages. I forget which.
Well, relative to the other metrics.
Yeah, it's very, so the high school screening data is very similar to what we see here, and then compared to the other metrics, it's kind of trickier because A-math assesses, like Dr. Murphy said, general math. So that's not always going to maybe net match up with what's being assessed in a geometry course, for instance. But we did see, when we did an analysis this year to look at is there a correlation, a strong correlation between A-math and the Keystone, this is the one data point that we had that had the strongest correlation to the Keystone score. So not that it's not causation, but there's still a really strong correlation there, which that tells me that there's a nice relationship. This is something we certainly want to continue to do because this might be the most reliable thing that we have to kind of predict to some degree how the students are eventually going to do.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Champagne. Mr. Jankowski?
Thank you for your presentation. This is really informative. I'm still troubled by the math data and the science data. Looking at the math, looking at the state average is kind of a gradual decline, which in of itself is an issue. But for our schools, it's like a cliff going from elementary to middle school in both math and science. Have we done a root cause analysis as to where does that stem from? Is it an elementary issue? Are our students not being prepared in the proper manner for what they're going to be learning in middle school? Or is it how they're being taught in middle school that is causing this big decline? Because with numbers like this, I would imagine there's got to be an answer somewhere in there. It's a pretty drastic fall off.
Yeah, so we have not done a formal root cause analysis, but many of the decisions that were made with the new things we've implemented this year, such as standardization of minutes and small group instruction and focusing on differentiation within the core, the K-8 tier protocol, many of those types of changes came out of walkthroughs that we did last year administratively and in partnership with Curriculum Associates and based on needs that we saw emerging at all levels, K-8, issues with discontinuity amongst the grade bands and things like that. And so we, time and time again, and also based on feedback from our middle level teachers and administrators, continue to return to, is Ready Classroom Mathematics the proper resource for our 6, 7, 8 schools? And so that's where we've started that work to examine its appropriateness and explore other options.
All right. It just seems to me that before you put a solution in place, you really need to know what the cause of the problem is, and that just moving to another program. How do you? What are we going to do in 2-3 years when we don't see a change? Are you going to go back and do a root cause analysis then? And is that too late? Or is that something that should be done now to make sure that what we're putting into place is actually going to have the intended results?
noted. And so one thing that I can share about something that continues to emerge as a concern with Ready Classroom Mathematics is the amount of time that you need to commit to teaching it exceeds the amount of time we have available in our middle school periods. So that's another consideration.
That's a problem.
It sure is, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bird?
First of all, thank you for the presentation. And a lot of my colleagues asked a lot of questions I'm going to ask. I just have a few of them that I want to ask. One of the ones that I want to talk about is the trending that we see. Like Mr. Champagne talked about the proficiencies in math, that they seem to trend downward from 6th to 8th grade. Also, growth numbers. Can you expound on that? And have you found the root cause for that? I guess I'm a root cause kind of guy.
So we haven't done a formal root cause analysis, but based on the information we've gathered from the walkthroughs and the teacher feedback and examining the resource as it stands right now, we're looking at its use in our middle level because we don't feel that we're able to properly implement it with fidelity in the 45-minute period. So that's where we're starting with looking at other resources to fit the systems that we have at East Penn in the middle schools.
So what changes are you proposing at this point? Are we going to wait another year? Or are we going to do something?
No, so we've convened a group that will review alternative resources for our curricular materials for math in the middle level, and we hope to have some of that piloted so that we can make a decision for next year.
Yeah. Another question with how are the special ed students looked at for these tests, state tests, and also people with IEP? How are they recorded? Do they take the test, or how is those numbers, how is that data influenced the overall number?
Sure. So students who have an IEP do take the PSSA unless they take the PASA if that's part of their IEP, if their IEP testing. However, less than 1% of the district should be in that category. So students who have an IEP are taking the PSSA, and they do have testing accommodations.
Okay. I have one last question. I know you showed a lot of data, peer data from other districts, and I just want to know what value does it add to our district and where we're going?
Showing the demographically alike districts?
Yes.
I believe that in showing that, we're just able to compare, so districts of similar size, districts of similar demographics, districts that we may think we should be able to perform similarly to if we're seeing different trends, or if we're seeing that we are not meeting a similar average. We know we need, in addition to knowing if we're not meeting our own goals of 80% or above, it just gives us a comparison to begin to explore what other programs and resources and systems and structures they have in place that might be working that we might consider or explore.
Are you careful when you look at that data? Because there are some pitfalls in doing that type of process.
Sure, and I think someone had mentioned earlier during the meeting tonight that sometimes you learn what not to do as well from looking at what other demographically like peers or other districts in general are doing.
Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. I think Ms. Bowman is ready to for part two.
Thank you. And actually, Mr. Champagne asked one of the bigger questions that I had, so thank you for that. On slides 17 and 18, because this actually affects something later in the night, for the class of 22 science Keystone, the scores are looking great, even though that was, I guess that cohort took that test before the pandemic. Is that why that one's doing so much better than the others?
This group reflects the students who took biology in 9th grade,
Yeah.
Which is the students that were taking honors biology. So it's a smaller group, and the students that took honors biology, very strong academic group, and they're the ones that are reflected in this, in this view.
Okay, and then you get to 23, and the percentages drop dramatically, whereas everybody else's percentages are coming up. What's affecting that? It's the next slide, slide 18, sorry.
Yeah, it's a totally different group then. So this reflects the students who took biology in 10th grade. So you're really looking at the other it's even more than half of the students that we typically come in, they have two choices as a ninth grader, GSI or honors biology. So when you're looking at this view, you're looking at the students who took biology in 10th grade. So the students who took honors bio were reflected in the previous view, and then in this view, you're seeing only those who took bio in 10th grade. So it's a very different group.
Is this score reflective of us generally, even pre-pandemic? Are we looking at, I mean, I don't know which number to go with, but 46% proficient in science?
Yeah, this is one where historically biology has been so strong for us that this is one where me personally, I'm not panicking about this one, just because we have so many years of data that goes back to show that biology proficiency is so strong for us in East Penn. So again, when you factor in the students that aren't part of this, I think that's a really big consideration. So it's hard to answer your question honestly, just because of there's so much missing when you look at it this way.
Okay, that's helpful. And then this was kind of new information for me tonight, and so I just want to make sure I understand it, because people do ask me this question a lot. When people opt out of the PSSAs, does that affect the district's overall score in this Future Ready data?
Doesn't someone?
Go ahead. It has to do with your overall testing. If more than 95% of students, if we exceed that threshold within a grade level band, it's a grade level band? A school, I'm sorry. If we exceed 95% of students, so 95% of the students have to take the exam. If we go below that 95%, then it starts to count against us.
And do we tend to go below it, or?
We do not tend to go below it, no. It is true in some of our buildings, but holistically, we don't tend to go below it. And Dr. Povolitis also indicated that that is based on a federal law, not a state law.
Well, I understand. I don't necessarily agree with these laws, but we have to deal with the deck that we're handed. This is really my last question is, I've been on the board for about 5 years, and this is the first time, I think, ever that I've had a presentation about our test score data. I get that 2.5 to 3 of those years was pandemic time, but this was incredibly helpful to see where our weaknesses are, where our growth areas are, things like that. And I'm a little curious as to what the view of the administration is going forward in terms of whether this will be a regular presentation, kind of a state of East Penn once a year kind of thing, or if this was, like, what was the driving force of this?
I'll speak a little bit to that. I think it may have been my either my first or second year as in my current role when our team did provide perhaps not as comprehensive, but really a high-level overview of district data at that time. Certainly, there then was a break in those presentations as a result of COVID, and I think we all recognize there was a year in which the test was not administered. So certainly, we recognize and appreciate that there's a lot of valuable information here, and I'll share that there's quantitative and then there's qualitative data that tells us how our students are performing in the district. And so you heard a lot tonight about that quantitative piece. Certainly, we can make this a regular part of our annual updates for the board and the community in terms of a high-level overview of how our students are performing.
I think the growth data in particular is helpful. For transparency, I think students, parents, even the staff here deserve to see how East Penn is doing and where our growth areas are and what we're doing about it. The more we can make that information public and transparent, the better.
Yeah, I'll reflect on your statement and say I agree. I think that the growth data is a really valuable piece of information because certainly we recognize the proficiency scores in and of themselves some may believe that they have limitations because it's recognizing a particular group at a single point in time, whereas growth is really tracking a cohort over time. The other piece that I think is really valuable, and I applaud our OTL team for framing the presentation in this way tonight, is helping to tell the story through data, and then most importantly saying, these are areas for continued growth or improvement for us, and here's a high-level overview in terms of how we're planning to address those areas. And hopefully you heard several times linking that back to goals that we've articulated in our comprehensive plan. So it really is bringing the whole system together. I'm done.
Well done. Mr. Champagne?
Two comments. I agree with what Ms. Bowman said, but I also want to caution how we present the data, because it is so open to interpretation that, and you would have to footnote this data extensively to make sure that people do not take something out of context. So however we present this data and how we make it transparent to the public, there has to be a lot of information that goes beyond just presenting the raw numbers, because the raw numbers themselves are not necessarily, if only 8 students take a particular test and that puts a score at 23%, that isn't very helpful to anyone. And so I think as we think about how this data is disseminated to parents and the public, it needs to be carefully caveated or footnoted is a better way to say it, so that people understand what it is and what it is not. And so that we don't end up making decisions based on bad information. Second thing is, I struggle with what is happening in the math department at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. To my other colleague's point, if you haven't done a root cause analysis as to why we're struggling, why are we trying to make curriculum changes at this point? So before we, I think, jump into that boat, I think we need to stop and do the root cause analysis to really understand what has gone on or is going on before we suddenly jump into another curriculum.
Thank you, Mr. Champagne. The other?
If I could also just respond to Mr. Champagne's first point about I almost term it as like the consistency of the data. And I think the team that presented tonight agrees with me in terms of recognizing that this year in particular, the state is late with producing some of that final data. And so we share your concern, and that's why in particular, like Mr. Mahalik tried so very hard, this particular slide that we're looking at, tried so very hard to look at our raw student data and make predictions in terms of what might be reported. You heard FRI, which is the Future Ready Index, which is the public outward-facing portal where you can access the information. And so certainly we agree that providing the same consistent data that will be reported to the public is very important, and that's why we tried in tonight's presentation, anytime that we were making predictions, we tried to identify that data source for you so that the board and community knew how we were coming up with those calculations.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Okay, well, I always appreciate the questions that my colleagues ask. They often ask the questions that I was thinking of as well. So I'm just going to sort of summarize a little bit. I do think it's important to note that, as a district, and again, through a collaborative effort between OTL and our teachers and other members of our staff, do endeavor to, look at data and compile data in order to make decisions on how to steer the district and student performance in the right direction. So it's not a stagnant condition. We look for opportunities for growth, look for what we're succeeding, where we're succeeding, and where there are opportunities to do better. So it's encouraging to see an active plan. And again, there's a lot of value in the data that we're collecting. That said, I think there's some cautionary comments that my colleagues made with respect to ensuring that when we make changes that we're basing it on definitive information, certainly the point about, understanding root cause, I think, is important in order to best inform steps forward. I have to believe that you probably did some of that in terms of trying to figure out, where to move forward, but perhaps there are things to do in it, to further develop that. So my colleagues, through their questions, understand, you made some requests for follow-up information. I do think that Ms. Bowman's suggestion of having this is perhaps an annual event, if you will, and to look at data and again, help us as a board and help the community and to see the active role that the district is taking to make things better, and we can assess those trends, and what we are doing is making that impact. And to Mr. Champagne's point, any information that we do put out there does need to be made clear. Certainly as educators, you understand this in and out and understand, all the nuance that goes along with it. I know you endeavored tonight to make it, far more accessible for, muggles like myself that don't necessarily, live this every day. But for the community to really understand and interpret the information, I think, a lot of care, if we do put resources out there, need to be made, crystal clear so that, information is interpreted properly and we can figure out where we're actually headed. So again, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the team for this presentation. It does make, as Dr. Campbell, opened the comments, there are a lot of areas that we can take, pride in terms of that, we're doing well. There are certainly areas that we're going to grow, and we are committed to making sure that, we take the steps so that we can help students, achieve and meet those benchmarks, but more importantly, get a complete education, and by the time they leave East Penn, they're ready for whatever's next. So if there are no other questions, again, thank you to the team for this, and we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is personnel. Before I call for a motion, I'd just like to make a couple notes. First, they're added today was an addendum to the personnel agenda to add additional items for retirements, professional appointments, substitute list, general leave of absence, and temporary professional employee appointment. And there's one correction on the main personnel agenda item, exhibit under item 6, under full-time substitute appointment, Vanessa Peters is going to be assigned to Iyer Middle School. So with those details, I'd now like to ask for a motion to approve the item A. We have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Also under personnel is item B, amendment number 2 to the EPSD Administrative and Compensation Plan Act 93 for the 2021 to 2024 time period. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Our next item is business operations. I'll make a note that item D is for informational purposes only, so if there are no objections, I'd like to take items A, B, C, and E together.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments on the items listed under business operations? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Next item on the agenda is curriculum. I'd like to take items A and B together. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Jankowski.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Dr. Whitney.
Aye.
Mrs. Bowen.
Aye.
Ms. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Byrd.
Aye.
Mr. Champagne.
Aye.
Mr. Falegi.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Okay, also under curriculum is item C for the 23-24 EHS Program of Studies. In order to engage in discussion, may I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, does the administration have any opening comments?
Yeah, I would like to start off just by clarifying what's being considered by the board this evening. Specifically, the most substantive changes to the 2023-24 Emmaus High School Program of Studies is the level of courses that will be offered in English and Social Studies. I want to highlight this is different from the original proposal based on feedback from teachers and the departments involved. Administration has revised the original proposal. Specifically, on the agenda this evening is the phasing out of GP level courses in English and Social Studies, beginning with 9th grade for next year. And also the phasing out of the GP level courses in English and Social Studies. The former CP level course would then be renamed as an on-level course. So the example to that, instead of English 9 CP, it would be English 9 for next year. The change is proposed to begin next fall, which would be our class of 2027, next year's freshman class, and roll up with that class in successive years. Our current 9th through 11th grade students at Emmaus High School who are in the GP tracks and or not in the GP tracks, but those current 9th through 11th grade students would continue to have all level coursework opportunities throughout the remainder of their high school career. We believe this model provides a consistent pathway for students who are moving from middle school to high school and does not impact the course-taking pathways of our current high school students. Furthermore, the model does allow our team to provide very targeted support for the teachers who would be incrementally involved in the change. We anticipate it would be approximately 5 to 6 English teachers, 5 to 6 social studies teachers, and then our special education teachers as they shift in the different instructional models. I also want to share with the community with regard to the revised phased-in approach to the changes, administration has identified that we would need additional special education staff. We anticipate a need for approximately 3 special ed teachers at Emmaus High School to fully facilitate the phased-in approach. That is because of the fact that we would look to maintain current special education teachers to support those GP classes in grades 10 through 12, while also needing to use special education staff in a different way with the phased-in changes in grade 9. The staffing needs would be addressed as part of the 2023-24 budget process when administration comes forward. We anticipate that's typically this spring where we would address budget priorities for the board and the community. In the event that the budgeted positions would not be approved as part of the budget process this spring, we would look to use ESSER funds to support the positions, recognizing that is a short-term solution to what would be a long-term need in terms of staffing. At the last meeting and over the course of the past 3 weeks, we have focused on the rationale for the change and have provided various data sets from multiple sources. And this evening, members of our administrative team will briefly focus on the professional development and implementation plan to prepare for and support the change in grade 9, while also beginning to develop capacity for changes that would happen then in grades 10 through 12 in successive years. So I do invite members of our admin team to come up and provide, again, an overview of the professional development and implementation plan. And I'm going to emphasize, and you will probably hear them emphasize as well, we're providing a framework for the plan, and as our teachers have emphasized to us, they wish to be involved as part of the change process. We want and need them to be involved as part of the change process. And so what's proposed is, again, a framework, and we hope that they will work alongside us to develop that framework even further and or make meaningful contributions to that.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. I couldn't agree more. That is really the key. I said it at my faculty meetings today, at my department chair meetings last week, faculty meetings last week. We absolutely need the input and the expertise of the experts working with our kids, and those are our teachers and our counselors. And so we have a few different areas of focus that we're going to need to tackle depending on what happens this evening. I'm going to speak about the first few. We divided it up between logistics, community input and involvement, the scheduling process, professional development, and of course, curriculum development. But regardless, any and all of these areas need collaboration and work. We need to work together with our stakeholders, teachers, parents, students, regarding the plan moving forward to discuss all of this together. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the logistics. Obviously, we need to meet with our teachers. We need to talk with them. We need to determine the team and the teachers who are willing to take on this challenge for English 9 and American Studies 1 next year. Obviously, the special ed teachers are crucial in making this change and this shift happen. We will be running multiple models simultaneously should this go through, and so we obviously need to have their input in every step of the way. We need to discuss how those special ed supports will be woven into the master schedule in both models. We have to develop the workflow for content modification. We need to identify the time required to meet with these teachers, whether we use and pull them out of faculty meetings or different professional development meetings, or provide coverage or time to meet over the summer. We need to meet with the counselors. We need to explain the shift so the counselors understand, so they can explain to the parents, to the 8th graders at the middle schools, and how to change and alter our 8th to 9th grade planning and transition for the upcoming school year. We have to discuss clear grading expectations, who's doing what, and what the expectations are for both English 9 and American Studies 1. And then there are other logistics like room assignments for our labs, our ELA lab for support, our 9th, 10th grade lab, and 11th grade, 12th grade lab, and of course the additional math lab classes. And ideally, we would love to develop some professional learning communities, some time for these teachers to work cross-curricularly between the English, the social studies, and the special ed teachers. That's always a goal, with or without this change. We would like to solicit input from our parents. I have a parent advisory meeting on Monday, and hopefully we'll get more people. I haven't had great turnout so far, but hopefully we can have some parents come out and provide information, their input, their explanation, ask questions, so we can explain the data that was presented to you this evening, but also explain how this will impact their children. We have to provide time in our guidance information night, in addition to the parent advisory meetings, to discuss course selection process. And I really would love, I get such great insight from our students at my monthly principal advisory meetings. And so they've been a wealth of knowledge, and they've really helped me better understand the Emmaus High School climate, culture, school. And lastly, our scheduling process. Obviously, Ms. Gamble, who is our master scheduler at the high school, is integral in making this all work behind the scenes. And so she has to fully understand the expectations, and she has to be involved in this from the beginning. We have to create teams. Ideally, when a special ed teacher is paired with a regular ed teacher on a regular basis, in a regular schedule, they develop almost a marriage between the two teachers. And so we would like to create teams and pairs of teachers that work well together, that will get the most bang for our buck, if you will, so that the special ed teachers aren't stretched too thin and have to work with too many different regular ed teachers. We have to adjust our counseling documents, rubric placements. We have to explain this to the middle school team and teachers and administrators and counselors. We have to develop the math lab and the ELA sections and criteria for proper placement in all of our classes. We would like to also define how to level up, if you will. We would want to encourage our students to stretch themselves and challenge themselves, and we want the kids to know and their parents to know what we're looking for when they request to level up, which would be a great thing. And then, of course, we also proposed credit recovery classes that I explained last month, so that upperclassmen aren't sitting and taking up seats in 9th grade and 10th grade classes. We would like to determine the teachers for those credit recovery courses and identify the students for those classes. I'll turn it over to Dr. Whitman, or Dr. Murphy, sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to talk first about professional development. I'd also like to echo what Mrs. Gariello and Dr. Campbell shared, in that this is professional development that sort of has been brainstormed as needs based on conversations I've had with other organizations who have implemented similar change, and also just from listening to the teachers over the last few weeks and their requests. However, I think that once we have our boots on the ground and a decision has been made, I'd really like to work with the teaching teams to ensure that what's on this list meets their needs moving forward. So ultimately, we'd like to talk to, work with, possibly visit other organizations that have implemented a similar change, especially to learn how they use their PLC models to ensure that rigor and continuity exist in their on-level track. We would like to provide professional development for our English and social studies teachers on effective differentiation strategies and universal design for learning, as well as the effective use of coaching. That's something else that we hear very consistently when we're working on multi-level grades or multi-level classrooms, ensuring that we have the ability to coach coach and conference effectively. Provide professional development for special ed teachers, specific to content facilitation, consultative facilitation, and student-specific facilitation. So those specific models that will ensure that students are getting what they need in their core classrooms. In addition, I think that we need continued professional development on teaching on the block, especially teaching on the block when you're meeting student abilities. So ensuring that there are solid plans for implementation and follow-up during observation and walkthroughs. As far as curriculum work, Mrs. Gariello shared much of this already, but ultimately all the departments are already undergoing the work regarding common assessments. So we'd really like to continue that work and ensure we have those common assessments in place, because again, they provide a common touch point for students throughout the year, not just relying on the midterm and final, but assessment points throughout the year that again maintain the rigor and the expectation for all teachers across those levels. We'd like to develop, update, and review the pacing guides for English 9 and American Studies 1, and then moving up. Develop a grading framework. Again, Mrs. Gariello shared that, ensuring that we have consistent late policies, grading structures, and rubrics. We'd like to meet monthly with this team, especially the first team out, to ensure that they have everything that they need, that we're continuing to update and modify the pacing guides and finalizing the review of common assessments. Over the summer, we can offer time for co-planning for those modifications to get some of them out of the way ahead of time. Develop the curriculum for our lab courses for the English and the proposed math lab. Determine the curriculum for the credit recovery courses, and I already stated that one. So that's sort of what we have on the docket. As I stated, some of those things are things that we as a department want to do anyway because we know that it's good practice, but others would be further expedited with this change.
Okay, I'll now open up to questions for the board. Ms. Bowen?
Thankfully, I have no questions this week, but I do have some comments. I didn't take this at all lightly after the presentation at the last meeting, and I did have an opportunity to meet with Dr. Campbell and Ms. Whitman, and they clarified a lot of the points and I guess the merits of the proposal. My concerns, though, remain the same. We have a room full of people here who are responsible for making these changes, and they're telling us they don't feel ready. That slate of tasks that you two just read off is long. And by my calculations, school will start in August. I'm not sure how feasible it is to push all of this through in the next 9 months. I think after meeting with Dr. Campbell and Ms. Whitman, I really do support the merits of the proposal. I think your laundry list of things are all best practice and all things we should aim for. My concern is that we had to roll in extra chairs tonight for the people who are really concerned about implementing this. And I don't know, I guess my concern is not necessarily should we or should we not, it's should we be doing this by next year.
Mr. Jankowski?
Thank you again for your presentation. I also have a statement more so than questions. I really appreciate the work that the administration's put into this, and I appreciate the concerns and the intended purpose of the change proposed. This is an enormous undertaking, and from my perspective, this vote is before us prematurely because a great deal of the list you just presented to us, from my perspective, should have been done in advance of the vote. Meeting with parent groups, visiting other schools that have done this, creating the matrix for the middle schools. I mean, I think this change is going to impact all students coming into our high school. And I'm not prepared to vote in favor of it today. Not that I'm against it happening, but I just don't think we're prepared for a vote today. I think more information needs to be gathered and more work needs to be done to make sure that this is the right move. Because I would hate to see this change be made and have us regret it, or have an exodus of students and teachers from our schools because it's not having the impact that we wanted, that the rigor isn't going to be there ultimately for the courses by removing the GP. So, again, I appreciate everything you've done, but I just think this is a premature vote, in my opinion.
Ms. Bowman?
I actually do have a couple questions before I say a statement. You had mentioned encouraging students to level up, but it was my understanding that in the middle school there are only 2 levels. There's honors and there's whatever you call not honors in the middle school. I'm not sure. I'm not making fun of it. I just genuinely don't know.
On level. Yeah.
And so those students, if you keep things the same for 9th grade, they just stay the same. They're not leveling up. They're other than moving on to 9th grade, and obviously 9th is harder than 8th, as it should be. But they're staying on the same level. Is that correct?
They don't have to if they're doing well in the middle school. We would like to encourage students to challenge themselves and to stretch themselves, so they don't have to, but we do want them prepared so they're not incredibly frustrated. And so that's what we want to define and better describe and have middle school students, parents, teachers, counselors understand.
That's okay. In the middle level, do you have the co-teaching structure that you're trying to put in place at the high school?
There is a co-teaching model at the middle school right now, yes.
Okay, and then that's in place in a similar way that you're envisioning it for this model? Or is it going to be different?
Yes, I would say that at the middle level, co-teaching only exists in ELA and math. It does not exist in science and social studies, so support is provided. Let me be more specific. For the population of learning support students that are most readily included, who receive the co-teaching model, those students receive co-teaching in English and math and additional support typically from an IA in science and social studies.
Are you envisioning that each class that does this, so each CP, ELA, and social studies class that has IEP students in it, will have a special education co-teach? So there'll basically be 2 teachers in every class.
Based on the model that's currently on the table, the plan would be to be very specific about how those individuals are used. As you heard, we have special education teachers. We need to make sure that we're using them strategically. So we would propose hand scheduling students. So students who, based on their data, are going to require the highest level of support when they are included. Those would be the students that would then receive a co-teacher that would be in that class for the entire time. That would be a co-teaching model. Students who, based on their data, teacher feedback, IEP team information, perhaps need less support. So maybe they don't necessarily have a goal in reading, for example. So those students might be placed in a section that a special ed teacher would visit for a portion of the period, and then that special ed teacher might visit another class for another portion of the period. That model is called a push-in model. And again, it sort of allows you to use your special education staff more wisely and strategically.
Okay. That's helpful. I feel like what's been lost in all of this is your vision for how it'll work. And I think part of that is the speed at which this came about. As I mentioned, I think last meeting, but I'm not sure. Usually in education, it takes years to make a change. I mean, there's things that we've been studying the whole time I've been on the board and they haven't come to fruition yet. And they're actually much smaller changes than this one. And I think that's part of what's generating the pushback that you're getting tonight, is that this came about so quickly. And though it was described to the stakeholders, they weren't included in the process of figuring out how it's going to work and how it's going to affect their day-to-day jobs. And how what I heard tonight from educators, and some of whom you've had my child in your class, and one person in particular, I think you gave a master class in how to give a rhetorical speech. I'm kind of staring at you so you know who you are. I wonderful role model for our kids. These teachers at the high school, they care deeply. I want to say to the educators that are here, I happen to have worked closely with all of these administrators for all the years I've been on the board, every single one, I think, except for a couple who are new. They care very deeply as well. One of the things that massively disappointed me was some of the emails that we got from the educators, specifically criticizing one of our administrative staff. Not a master class in how to get your point across, in my opinion. We can do better. We can work together. We all have a common goal. The common goal is to improve education at East Penn for our kids. We want more kids to succeed. And I think we all share that goal. And I think if we come across, if we start from that place, we will be able to do that. That said, I am, like the other board members, really concerned about the speed of this. And I think the speed of it is really kind of where everything went sideways. So I will say, when this idea was first presented to me, I was pretty hostile to it. I didn't really understand how it felt like magic. Like, we're going to give kids higher expectations, and they're suddenly going to rise to those expectations and do better than they were before. And that felt like a little bit of an abundance of positive thinking to me. But when I took my time and researched the data that was presented to us, and also that's also out there for anybody to research about mindset, not just mindset for learning, but your stress mindset. There's many studies on this. There's a lot of merits to where this is coming from. And so, like Ms. Bowen, I've come around to the thought that this would benefit East Penn, but I am heavily concerned about how it was described to our educators. Like I said, our educators care and they need to be included in this process. And included doesn't mean, hey, we're going to have a meeting and we're going to tell you what we're doing. Included means help us do this successfully. And so I feel that I would like to table this for 1 month, and I would like the administration to meet with the educators and come up with a plan to implement this in a way that everybody, I mean, obviously not everybody's going to be happy, I get that, but in a way that isn't so hostile. Ultimately, I think it is the way to go, but it's not the way to go if you're going to be pushing this process that you don't have people who are receptive to it. That's not going to help our students.
So I completely appreciate that feedback. I think one of the things I want to speak to is tonight, as we were looking at math data, I'm sitting there listening as the members of the OTL team are being asked, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? And can you do it next year? So I'm just going to highlight that and say, so some of these things, when we are trying to respond to the request of like, fix this, comes from that place. And or this is the staffing you have, and so make this work. And so definitely I've shared data with you that our special education population has gone up by 2%. We need to look at more effective models to be able to remediate kids. So it wasn't not coming from, I think, a place of haste in a vacuum, but simply a direction of how are you going to address all these needs that are coming out of the pandemic.
Thank you. Mr. Byrd.
Just have a couple of comments, I guess. I've done a lot of soul searching the last month when the first presentation came out, and I guess I looked at what is the real value, and maybe somebody can answer that question. What is the true value that this program will bring to East Penn School District?
I mean, I'll start off by saying certainly our team attempted to articulate that when we looked at appropriately challenging all students, helping all students to be successful, looking at current proportions of students in different level courses and having those proportions of whether it's our IEP students or other minority groups be equally represented across course levels, and or what we might describe as natural proportions of our students. But again, ultimately, one of our main drivers should be about appropriate, challenging educational opportunities for all kids and students making growth in their content areas.
I guess one comment, as I looked at this whole program, I guess one of the comments or one of the concerns I have is how it was sold or how it was rolled out. I think some of the things, the comment that I kind of concerned about as we look at other districts. I guess I come from a world where we don't look at our competitors, we look at ourselves and find out exactly what we want to do and what is best for us. So I would hope we would try to sell in a different way to our stakeholders and community. That's best for East Penn, not what's best for the other districts. I guess one thing is I read it, I'm not against it, but I right now would like to see basically table this until all stakeholders are on board and we have a great plan to put this in place. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd.
Point of order, Mr. Levinson. We've had two people mention tabling, but I haven't heard the magic
Hasn't
words
been a
yet.
motion yet, that's why.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Champagne.
Yeah, I echo some of my colleagues' comments. I mean, after hearing the list of things that have to be accomplished, and we're sitting here at the middle of this November, and to get it in place by August, I really would like to understand how it's all going to line out. If I were, as a project manager, I'd want to see a detailed project chart to see, is there enough time to really accomplish all the things that were identified by, the administration that have to be done, and not just done, but done in a way that, it is absorbed by the people that need to actually teach these classes. On the other hand, I think delay is always the death knell of any initiative. You start delaying things, you start stretching things out, it just dies. I've been through too many initiatives in industry where if you start to say, well, we can wait a month or we can try to get it done the year after, it just doesn't happen, because what ends up happening, there's something else that comes up and something else takes precedent, and then all of a sudden what may be the most important thing is just left on the vine to die. So I am somewhat reluctant to move forward because I don't think the schedule is doable, but on the other hand, I don't think that delaying it is the right option either. I think we have the data that supports the decision to move forward. And to echo Ms. Bowman's comments about how some of the correspondences were received, I got really angry, to tell you the truth, with some of the correspondences that we got, because I didn't think it was appropriate at all for what was said about certain people. You may disagree, you may have other issues to raise, but you don't tear down somebody's character. That doesn't happen. That's not who we are. It's not who we should be. It's not how we should act at all. So that was the most disappointing thing in this whole process. I'm in favor of this, and I'd like to see it go forward, but I'd like to hear from the rest of my colleagues about what they're thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Champagne. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, so I'm going to share my thoughts, and it sounds like there may be more coming into the discussion that we may, a second stage of the discussion tonight yet to come. But for now, I'll share my thoughts. So it is good to see all the green and yellow in the audience tonight. I hope to see plenty of that in the future as well. 7:23 comes awfully early, so thank you for remaining with us so late into the evening. As it's getting late, I have prepared some notes, as a couple of my colleagues have as well. But with so many English teachers in the audience, I'd ask for forgiveness for any split infinitives or sentences that may end in a preposition. It's late, and
You're allowed to do that now. They changed the rules.
Oh, I'm allowed to do that now? Okay, what about the Oxford comma? Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I also want to preface my comments, for some of you in the room may know this, many of you do. I'm also sharing this perspective, not only as a board member and, with some professional experience as well, but I'm also the parent of two members of the class of 2027, so who would be directly impacted by the decision tonight, one way or the other, the success of the change, one way or the other. They are the ones that I am most held accountable to. So as I look into their eyes, in the next 4 years of their school career, 4.5 years, 4 3/4, they're the ones that I really, make these comments for really in the back of my mind, or biggest in the back of my mind, I should say. So I'm grateful for the input shared by teachers to both the administration and the board. It was encouraging to see that both administration and teachers recognize the problems and challenges that exist within the current structures of the English and social studies systems. It's clear that there are strong differences in opinion as to the best approach in finding solutions to these problems. The needs of the teachers should be considered. Deliberate, impactful, collaborative, and measurable action must be taken on the part of all parties so that teachers can be prepared come fall. However, this systemic change should have happened across grades 9 through 12, but it should have happened quite some time ago. Delaying this for another school year is not an option. The challenges we face are not a reflection of the tireless efforts on the part of our teachers. Rather, our data reflects systemic and structural issues that need immediate addressing. We have heard many comments and concerns about why not to take this action, but few proposed solutions as to how to address the problems that everyone seemingly agree exists. Teachers have different professional needs at every level: primary, intermediate, and secondary, and different structures built around what they do each day specific to those levels. However, some of the concerns we have heard seem to be concerns that do not exist to the same degree in classrooms that fit the typical learning profile of elementary or middle school classroom communities. I will be voting in favor of this change so as not to delay further the program of studies as a whole. I'm not in favor of adding additional personnel as it will increase costs, but I ask that if those teachers are necessary to the success of the inclusion model, I ask that the expenditures tied to that additional personnel be reflected in reductions to expenditures elsewhere. I also ask that this be communicated in the upcoming budget presentations. There's a lot of work ahead of us at every level of the district if we hope to make this shift successful. I look forward to hearing not only how that work will be accomplished, but also regular progress updates on that work as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Falegi.
Yeah, I basically just have I don't really have any questions on this. I've done a lot of, I guess, soul searching. I had the opportunity this morning to talk to Dr. Campbell about it. Since the last board meeting, there has not been a day really that I haven't thought about it. It's not that I'm against it in any way. I think it would lead ELA and social studies in the right direction, our students in the right direction. However, some of my colleagues have stated that it just seems like it's a lot to get done in a short amount of time. I'm not against tabling it for one more month. I appreciate all the teachers being here. They live at the front line, so I take it to heart. Those that have reached out to me, being students and parents, seem like it's happening so fast, and I feel it is. Hearing that list of what needs to be done between now and then, kind of made my head spin a little bit. It just seems like a lot, so I would be for tabling it for at least one more month till we can get some more buy-in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Falegi. Dr. Whitney?
Yeah. I'll try to be short and sweet here. I know it's late, and I don't want to belabor the points that my colleagues have made, many of which I agree with. I do also thank the teachers for being here and for their feedback. I don't think it's inappropriate to criticize leadership. That's the price of leadership. But I also think that there were a lot of comments in the feedback that I think, to my eyes, betrayed the root issues that are trying to be solved by this proposal. And we clearly have a culture problem. We have a culture problem in how we evaluate certain groups of students. And I think we have a culture problem in how we track those students through our curriculum and what we feel students are capable of. I love the talk about students having the option to level up, but I also remember us talking about more restrictions on when students can transfer courses from one to another, and I'm not quite sure how those two things square. And I'm not convinced that just saying we're going to make leveling up an option will make it happen. I'm not sure I've heard a really specific outline for how that will happen and how it will happen differently under this new program of studies. I agree with my colleagues that the speed of this and the vast amount of professional development and that's been thrown out there, I feel like it's a laundry list that doesn't feel to me really supportable. And clearly, the faculty do not feel like it's supportable. And that, I think, is where the proof of the pudding is. And we have to, if we're not aligned on this, then this is not a change this change can happen, but it's not going to solve the root issues that we're trying to solve, which is to make East Penn education truly equitable without regard for a student's background or without regard for how they might present differently than the typical East Penn student. I think there's a lot of work to be done in that regard, up and down our district. And I think that's the work I'd like to see focused on, and I'm not convinced that this is the solution to that, or that this will get us there as quickly and as swiftly as we want. I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Dr. Whitney. Any additional comments? Okay.
Could I was waiting, do you want to make comments, or I'd like to make the motion, but I was waiting for everybody to have a chance to make their comments. Is there anyone else who, I'm sorry, I'm doing your job for you.
That's fine. I mean, if you wanted to make a motion, that motion could happen at any time.
Okay. So I would like to make a motion that we table this until the next meeting. This is not technically part of the motion, but what I'm hoping to see by the next meeting is an implementation plan, not a list of things of these are all the things that we need to do, but an actual plan that says when we're doing them. And I would like for the administration to work with our educators to come up with that plan so that there is buy-in for it. Whether this gets shrunk so that maybe we don't do a full rollout or whatever, for me to vote yes on this, that plan needs to be in place with buy-in from the educators. So anyway, the actual motion, though, is just to table this until the next meeting.
I think the next meeting is actually the reorganization, so would you
Okay,
be
sorry, the
suggesting
meeting.
the December 12th?
And perhaps I could have some
December
input from Mrs.
December 14th
Gariallo
will be
about
next.
how that affects the whole program of studies if we do it that late.
December 12th.
I'm sorry, Ms. Bowen, which could you repeat the last sentence?
Could Mrs. Gariallo tell us about voting on the entire program of studies that late in December?
Point of order, do we need to have a second first?
December 12th was the meeting she's referring to.
Right, but did we get a second for her motion?
Before discussion.
Okay. Is there a second to Ms. Bowman's?
I second.
Okay, now we can discuss. Maybe address your question.
Yeah, okay. It is a little bit of a wrench in things. The goal was this year, our schedule was very late last year for a variety of reasons, and it caused, a ripple effect to parents, to students, to the teachers, planning over the summer. In some cases, teachers didn't know what they were teaching. So my goal this year was really to have the master schedule done in the hands of our counselors by May 1st, so that if changes needed to be made, if students needed to make course switches or anything like that, they had the information before they left for the summer, and the counselors could actually meet with the students in person and not trying to do it via email in August. So with that being an initial goal, regardless, before any of this happened, that was a goal of mine coming in. So this does back that up. It will impact our guidance information night, and it's not insurmountable. Please know it's absolutely not insurmountable, but it will adjust the timeline for it. It's a domino effect, and we start from that May 1st deadline and work our way backwards, and it does impact the timeline.
Does it help you if we do two separate votes? One is on all of your other changes to the program of studies except for this one?
That would be fabulous.
Okay.
If Dr. Campbell and
And
everybody's.
I have help on how to say that motion.
Do you want to further amend your let me think for a second.
Keeping Janine busy.
I thought if you tabled it.
I think
We
it
have
might
to
be
vote. Do we have to vote this motion, and then can we make a new motion?
Once
No, I
it's
think
tabled-
it's probably better if you do another amendment to this motion first that would state that you approve the program of studies except for the proposed detracking change which you wish to table to the December 12th, 2022 meeting.
That's what I want to do.
Don't make me repeat that, please.
Oh, I saw Josh write it down.
Is that clear?
Being
That's
recorded.
Yes, so you'll have to make the amended motion. I'll speak it, and then you can,
I
Affirm.
make the amended motion as Mr. Fisher suggested.
okay, and again, for those, is there a second? Somebody?
Oh, second.
Okay, thank you. So again, Ms. Scariello, did you have?
I will say, without that one decision, though, even though it will allow us to start planning for the other things, that one decision is critical. Okay.
Okay, so again, the motion as proposed is to approve the program of studies as written, except for those changes associated with detracking for English 9 and American Studies 1. Is there any additional comment? And I'm sorry, and to add to that portion, the detracking is tabled to the 12/12 meeting. Is there any additional comment? Okay. I will say a couple things now. I think, my colleagues, again, asked a lot of good questions, made a lot of good points. I'm not going to belabor them. I do think that, a lot of these plans do require some compromise. I do think that, at least initially, a compromise of, instead of doing all at once, 9 through 12, going to 9th grade, did seem like a viable way to make that work, because you can learn a lot by rolling something in. But you can't discount, obviously, the sentiments that were shared by our educators and students in terms of the haste. I think my colleagues on the board who made that point were right in saying that it does seem quickly. I do think that by tabling until December, it does give another opportunity by which administration and our educators can come to some agreement as to how this can move forward. I certainly share the point that's been made by my colleagues that there is strong merit for this change and how it works. The data that's out there in other districts that have implemented it, that can and does work. I will admit, listening to the bullet item list that both Mrs. Scariello and Dr. Murphy spoke was a very long list, a lot of items. It was hard for me, and go with Mr. Champagne's point, looking at it as a project manager, how you would schedule all that and get that all done, and again, have everybody, on board. So I do think in the interest of everybody involved, taking a pause for a month, at least on that aspect, does make sense. And I'm going to support the amended motion. I don't know if there's any additional comment. If not, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Bowen?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is other educational entities for LCTI JOC member report. Mr. Champagne?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Levinson. I will make this brief at the late hour. There was a hybrid meeting of the Joint Operating Committee held on Wednesday, October 26th. We honored a number of the health and medical science program students who represented LCTI at HOSA's Future Health Professionals, both statewide and in an international conference in June. Two East Penn students, Shannon Anders and Kayra Hatchard, both placed third in the APA competition. As Dr. Campbell mentioned, the 8th and 9th grade tours were scheduled and over 3,200 participated in those tours, went exceedingly well. And 5th grade tours are planned for the spring, so I think that's a great thing. There's also an availability if the boards of a school district would like to tour LCTI as a group. We can do that. Catasauqua is doing that, I think, this month, or they did it last month. I can't remember which. But if you would like that opportunity, if people would like to see it who have not been up there, would like to go, that can be arranged. Just let myself, Mr. Smith, Dr. Levinson, or Mr. Bird know if you're interested. Darren Van Norman reported out on some things that happened with respect to other visitors. Eastman and Kingsport, Tennessee Chamber of Commerce came to visit because of the programs at LCTI. They see a great merit in what we are doing. There was also a career discovery day down at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. There was a welding competition with DoD shipbuilding project. There were 45 competitors, and one of our students, James Wynn, took third place. And this was a very sophisticated welding program. Some personnel issues that we discussed. One is unfortunate. Dr. Mark Cavell has resigned as Director of Academic and Special Programs to become the Executive Director of the new Middle Bucks Institute of Technology. Those of you who have been here for a while know Dr. Cavell. He's a great loss to LCTI, but we were able to hire, I think, a good replacement to help part of the load, a gentleman by the name of Matthew Zampetti. In addition, we also had the Joint Operating Committee seat allocation for 2023 finalized. It really hasn't changed. Parkland still has 6 seats, East Penn has 4, Allentown 3, Southern Lehigh and Whitehall Copley 2 each, and Catasauqua, Northern Lehigh, Northwest Lehigh, and Salisbury 1 each. And then on a public relations standpoint, they finalized a contract with the PPL Center for the Senior Recognition Night, which will be held on May 31st of 2023. And what I have heard is the open house is a great success. They had over 300 RSVPs at the time of our meeting in October and expected more, but everything I heard was wonderful. That's my report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Champagne. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Jankowski?
One quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One quick thing. Catasauqua, weren't they having their actual board meeting there?
I don't know.
They're just going for a tour.
That's what they said.
They said, all right. I thought it was both. They could,
Yeah.
but we could do both.
So we do have the ability to host. They offered us the opportunity to host one of our monthly board meetings or biweekly board meetings at LCTI.
Yeah. As well as the tour, I think, goes with that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be, I mean, depending on what we do, a board meeting or tour, I think it'd be great if we get a group of us to go, if we could coordinate times, or, I don't know, Janine, if you can, want to send around an email to help coordinate availability so we can do kind of a tour. Yeah,
Yeah, and
I think
just-
that'd be great.
Just talk to Lisa Greenwald up there, Janine. She'll help figure out when it's available.
Okay, great. I'm happy that there's strong interest in that. It's a remarkable place if you've never been there. Any other comments, questions? Okay, item B is the appointment of LCTI JOC members. Prior to asking for the motion, I'm going to state that myself, Mr. Bird, and Mr. Smith, our 3-year terms are expiring at the end of December this year, so we need to appoint 3 members of this board to be among the 4 members that we have on the JOC itself. I've discussed already with Mr. Bird and Mr. Smith, and they have continued interest in being East Penn representatives for the JOC, as do myself. So the 3 of us would like to be considered by the board for reappointment. If there are no objections, I'd like to have that motion be made and seconded to reappoint myself, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Byrd.
So moved. Second.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Bowen?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. There are no other items. There are a handful of announcements. First, there's an executive session held tonight. The topics are on a variety of confidential matters and a matter of litigation. The district is going to be closed for the Thanksgiving holiday from Thursday, November 24th through Monday, November 28th, 2022. We have a reorganization meeting on Monday, December 5th, here in this room at 7:30. And our next regular board meeting is going to be on Monday, December 12th, also at 7:30. If there's nothing further, I'd like a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you and have a good evening.